On the day my only son, Terrence, was getting married to the woman of his dreams, I drove up to the venue entrance only to find a laminated poster attached to the security gate. It featured a candid photo of my wife and me wearing our dirty gardening clothes, and beneath our faces was a warning printed in bold red ink. Absolute no entry. Do not let these two in under any circumstances. They will ruin the luxury aesthetic. My wife Beatrice broke down in tears right there in the passenger seat, but I did not shed a single drop. I simply put the truck in reverse, turned around, and made one phone call that would change the course of the evening. 2 hours later, while my son was raising a glass of expensive champagne, he realized that when he banned his parents from his wedding, he also banned the bank account that was paying for it. Before I tell you how I ended a marriage before it even began, let me know in the comments where you are watching from and if you think family loyalty still means anything these days. My name is Bernard Freeman, and at 70 years old, I have learned that silence is often the loudest sound in the room. For 40 years, I worked as a chief engineer in a steel mill, swallowing smoke and dust, so my son would never have to. To the world, and especially to my son Terrence, I am just a retired old man who drives a beat-up 1998 Ford F-150 and wears flannel shirts that have seen better days. Terrence always hated that truck. He used to tell me that it smelled like oil and hard labor. And he was right. It smelled like the work that paid for his private school, his marketing degree, and the designer suits he now wears to his high-rise office. What Terrence does not know is that while he was busy being ashamed of my blue-collar roots, I was busy investing every spare dollar I earned into real estate along the industrial belt. I own warehouses, logistics centers, and apartment complexes that generate more revenue in a month than Terrence makes in 2 years. My net worth is sitting comfortably around $8 million, but I never told him. I wanted him to build his own character, not live off mine. That Saturday afternoon, the sun was beating down on the hood of my truck as Beatrice and I made our way to the grand estate. It was the most exclusive wedding venue in the suburbs, the kind of place where the grass is manicured with scissors and the air smells like money. Beatrice looked beautiful. She was wearing her Sunday best, a lavender dress she had bought specifically for this occasion, and a matching hat that hid her graying hair. She was nervous, wringing her hands in her lap. She kept asking me if I thought Madison's parents would like us. Madison was our new daughter-in-law, a white girl from a family that Terrence described as old money and high society. He had been very clear with us over the phone months ago. He told us that this was going to be a black tie event and that he did not want us to feel uncomfortable surrounded by senators and business tycoons. He suggested we skip the ceremony and maybe just send a card. It hurt, but Beatrice insisted that we at least drive by to drop off our gift. I patted my chest pocket where a thick envelope was resting against my heart. Inside was a cashier's check for $50,000. It was our wedding gift to them, a down payment for a house so they would not have to rent anymore. I thought that maybe money could not buy class, as Terrence would say, but it could certainly buy a future. As we turned onto the long, winding driveway lined with oak trees, a line of Bentleys and Mercedes stretched out ahead of us. My old Ford rattled and coughed the exhaust pipe, letting out a small puff of black smoke that seemed like a crime in this pristine environment. I saw the valet drivers wrinkling their noses as we approached, but I kept my head high. I paid for this, I thought to myself. I did not say it aloud, but I knew that the $80,000 transfer I had sent Terrence last month under the guise of my life savings was the only reason this party was happening. We reached the main security checkpoint. A tall, burly guard with sunglasses and an earpiece stepped out and held up his hand, stopping us before we could even get close to the valet stand. He did not ask for an invitation. He did not ask for our names. He just looked at my truck, then looked down at a clipboard and finally pointed to a sign stand that had been placed strategically to the side of the booth. I rolled down the window, expecting him to tell me I needed to park in the service entrance. Instead, he leaned down and gave me a look of pure condescension. "Sir, you need to turn this vehicle around immediately. This is a private event." "I know it is private," I said, keeping my voice calm. "My name is Bernard Freeman. I am the groom's father. This is his mother. We are just here to drop off a gift." The guard let out a short, dry laugh that sounded like a bark. He shook his head and tapped the sign stand with his baton. "I do not care if you are the President of the United States. I have strict orders. Look at the board." I looked. Beatrice looked. And then time seemed to stop. There on a tripod was a large poster board, laminated against the weather. On it was a blown-up photograph of Beatrice and me, It was a picture taken from a distance, likely with a zoom lens while we were working in our community garden 3 weeks ago. In the photo, I was wearing my stained overalls covered in mud, and Beatrice was wearing a bandana and an old t-shirt. We looked dirty. We looked tired. We looked like the laborers we were proud to be. But above our heads in aggressive red block letters were the words, "Warning. Do not admit these two people. They will ruin the luxury aesthetic. Keep them out at all costs." Beatrice let out a sound I will never forget. It was a gasp that turned into a whimper as if someone had physically punched her in the stomach. She covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with disbelief, staring at her own face on a wanted poster at her son's wedding. "That is us," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Bernie, that is us. Why would he do that?" The guard smirked, adjusting his sunglasses. "Look, old man, the groom was very specific. He said he has worked too hard to get into this family to have you two rolling up in a scrap truck smelling like fertilizer. This is a black tie affair, not a backyard barbecue in the ghetto. Now turn around before I call the police for trespassing." I sat there for a moment, feeling the heat of the engine radiating through the floorboards. I looked at the guard. I looked at the sign. And then I looked at my wife, the woman who had packed Terrence's lunch every day for 18 years. The woman who had tutored him every night so he could get into a good college. She was shrinking into her seat, humiliated by the fruit of her own womb. I did not yell. I did not scream. I did not demand to see my son. A strange coldness settled over me, a clarity that I had not felt since my days managing high-pressure boiler systems at the plant. When the pressure gets too high, you do not hit it with a hammer. You cut the fuel. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope. The guard watched me, his hand resting on his taser, probably thinking I was reaching for a weapon. I pulled out the check for $50,000. I unfolded it slowly so he could see the numbers. The zeros lined up perfectly next to the 5. "I am not trespassing," I said, my voice steady and low. "I am just leaving." I crumpled the check in my fist, squeezing it until the paper cracked. Then I opened the truck door just enough to drop the ball of paper into the trash can sitting next to the guard booth. "You can tell the groom he saved himself a lot of embarrassment," I said. "And he also saved himself $50,000. I shifted the truck into reverse. The gears ground together loud and ugly. I backed out of that driveway, leaving the line of luxury cars behind me. I did not look back at the venue. I did not look back at the sign. I focused on the road and on my wife, who was sobbing quietly into her handkerchief. But as the tires hit the main asphalt road, my phone sitting on the dashboard buzzed. It was a notification from my private banking app. It was a high-priority alert. I glanced at the screen. It was a request for authorization, a pending charge of $35,000 from the Grand Estate Catering Services. I remembered then. Months ago, Terrence had come to me with a sob story about needing a credit card for emergencies for the wedding planning. He said he needed a backup in case vendors required deposits. I had given him a supplementary card linked to one of my accounts, but I had set strict permissions that required my final approval for anything over a certain limit. He must have swiped the card just now to pay the remaining balance for the reception, likely assuming I would blindly approve it as I always did. I looked at the notification blinking on my screen. Approve or decline. The image of that poster flashed in my mind. Do not let these two in. My finger hovered over the screen. Beatrice was wiping her eyes, trying to compose herself, asking me if maybe it was a mistake, if maybe the bride's family had put the sign up without Terrence knowing. She was still trying to protect him, still trying to be the mother. "It was no mistake, B," I said softly. I tapped the button on the screen. Decline. Then I opened the settings menu for the card. I scrolled down to the user management section where Terrence's name was listed. I selected the option that said, Report lost or stolen, and then I selected the final option, Freeze account. The phone buzzed, one last time confirming the action. The line of credit was dead. The money was gone. I drove us home in silence, knowing that miles away in a crystal ballroom, my son was currently raising a toast to a life he could not afford. He had about 30 minutes before the manager would tap him on the shoulder and ask for a payment method that actually worked. The wedding was over. The war had just begun. The silence inside the cab of my truck was heavy enough to crush bone. My wife Beatrice sat beside me, her face turned toward the passenger window, watching the blur of suburban trees pass by. She was trying to hide her tears, but I could hear the sharp intake of her breath every few seconds, a sound that tore at my insides more than any insult could. The engine of the old Ford hummed its familiar rough tune, a vibration I usually found comforting, but today it just felt like the grinding of teeth. My mind replayed the conversation I had with Terrence 3 months ago. He had sat at our kitchen table, refusing to take off his sunglasses, tapping his foot nervously. "Mom." "Dad," he had said, "Madison and I have decided to keep the wedding very small. Just a few close friends, maybe a couple of co-workers. It is going to be a modern thing, very intimate. We do not want to put you through the stress of a big event." I remembered how Beatrice had looked at him, disappointment clouding her eyes, but she had nodded. She had said she understood. She said, as long as they were happy, that was all that mattered. We believed him. We actually believed him. We thought he was trying to save us money, trying to be considerate of our retired status. But the scene we had just left told a different story. That was not a small, intimate gathering. The parking lot was overflowing with luxury vehicles. I saw catering trucks the size of city buses. I saw security teams. I saw a guest list at the gate that looked longer than a phone book. There were at least 500 people in there. Senators, business tycoons, the elite of the city. He had lied to us. He did not want to save us stress. He wanted to save himself the embarrassment of being seen with us. He looked at his mother, the woman who worked double shifts as a teacher to buy him his first laptop, and he saw a liability. He looked at me, the man who taught him how to tie a tie and how to be a man, and he saw a dirty mechanic. He was terrified that his new white upper-class in-laws would see the calluses on my hands or the simple dress his mother wore and realize that he was not the blue-blooded prince he pretended to be. He wanted to scrub his history clean, and that meant scrubbing us out of the picture completely. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The anger that was rising in me was not hot and explosive. It was cold. It was the kind of cold that freezes a lake solid in the dead of winter. It was calculated. I reached for my phone, which was mounted on the dashboard. Beatrice looked over at me, her eyes red and swollen. "Bernie, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice cracking. "I am handling business, B," I replied. I scrolled through my contacts past the local hardware store and the family doctor until I found a number I had not called in over 6 months. It was listed simply as James Henderson. To the world, James Henderson is the Senior Director of Private Wealth Management at the city's largest bank. To me, he is the man who has managed my portfolio for 15 years. He is the only person outside of this truck who knows that Bernard Freeman is not just a retired steelworker, but a silent investor who owns half the industrial warehousing district on the south side. I pressed the call button and put it on speaker. The phone rang once, twice. Bernard James's voice came through clear and professional. "This is a surprise. I usually only hear from you when the market takes a dive or you are looking to buy another complex. Is everything all right?" "No, James, everything is not all right," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. "I need to make some immediate changes to my account status. I need you to verify my identity." There was a pause. I could hear the shift in James's tone. He knew I did not play games. "Go ahead, Bernard." "Security code. Steelhead 1974, I said. "Access granted," James said. "What do you need?" "First," I said, "I need you to place a stop payment order on a cashier's check I withdrew yesterday. The check number is ending in 550. Amount is $50,000. "Done," James said, the sound of typing clicking in the background. "I have flagged it. If anyone tries to deposit that, it will be rejected immediately. Anything else?" "Yes," I said. "And this is the important part. The supplementary platinum credit card issued to Terrence Freeman, the one linked to my primary holding account. I have the file right here," James said. "I want you to cancel the transaction authorization for the Grand Estate Catering Services. It is currently in pending status for $35,000. "Decline it," Bernard James said, his voice hesitant for the first time. "If I decline a charge of that magnitude while it is pending, it is going to cause a significant scene at the point of sale. That is a wedding venue. Are you sure?" "I am absolutely sure," I said. And James, I continued, "I want you to freeze that card completely. Market is compromised. I want the credit limit reduced to 0 effective immediately." There was a silence on the line. James was a smart man. He knew this was not about financial security. This was personal. He did not ask why. He did not try to talk me out of it. He simply did his job. "I need a reason for the file," James said finally. "For the bank records." "Do I list it as lost or stolen?" "Listed as a fraud of trust," I said. "I understand," James said softly. "The authorization has been revoked. The card is frozen. Is there anything else I can do for you today, Bernard?" "No, James. Thank you. That will be all." I hung up the phone. Beatrice was staring at me, her mouth slightly open. She knew we had savings, but she had never heard me speak to anyone like that. She had never heard the authority in my voice when I spoke about millions. "Bernie," she whispered. "What did you just do?" "I cut the fuel line, B," I said, turning the truck onto our quiet street. I just cut the fuel line. At that very moment, 5 miles away, I knew exactly what was happening. I could picture it as clearly as if I were standing in that crystal ballroom myself. My son Terrence would be standing at the head table tapping a silver spoon against a crystal flute of vintage champagne. He would be wearing a tuxedo that cost more than my first car. He would be smiling, that charming smile of his, looking out at a sea of 500 faces, feeling like the king of the world. He would be looking at Madison, his beautiful bride, thinking that he had pulled it off. He had successfully erased his past. He had kept the embarrassing old parents away. He had secured his place in high society. He would raise his glass to propose a toast to the future, and then he would see the banquet manager. The manager would not be smiling. He would be walking briskly through the tables, holding a wireless credit card terminal and a printed receipt. He would step up to the head table, interrupting the toast. He would lean in close to Terrence's ear, but in a room that silent whispers carry. "Mr. Freeman," the manager would say, "we have a problem with the payment." Terrence would laugh it off. He would wave his hand dismissively. "Just run it again," he would say. "It is a platinum card. It has no limit." The manager would shake his head. "We did run it, sir. 3 times. It has been declined. The bank says the account is frozen." I could imagine the blood draining from Terrence's face. He would look at Madison's parents, who would be frowning. He would look at Madison, whose perfect smile would be starting to crack. "We need an alternative form of payment immediately," the manager would continue, his voice dropping the professional politeness. "The balance is $45,000 for the venue, the food, and the open bar. If we do not receive payment in the next 10 minutes, we will be forced to stop the service. The waiters will stop pouring, the band will stop playing, and security will ask your guests to leave." Terrence would fumble for his wallet. He would pull out his own personal cards, the ones with the $3,000 limits, the ones that were already maxed out from buying the engagement ring and the designer shoes. He would try them, desperate, sweating in his tailored suit. Decline, decline, decline. Panic would set in, real suffocating panic. He would realize in front of everyone he was trying to impress that the well had run dry. He would realize that the rich father he had invented did not exist, and the real father he had banned was the only one who could save him. I pulled the truck into our driveway and turned off the engine. The silence returned, but this time it felt different. It was the silence of a judge who had just delivered a sentence. "Let's go inside, B," I said. "I think we need to keep our phones close. We are about to get a call." We pulled into the driveway of our ranch-style house, and the silence that had filled the truck seemed to follow us inside. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that pressed against my eardrums. The house was exactly as we had left it 4 hours ago. The morning coffee pot was still cold on the counter. The newspaper was folded neatly on the kitchen island. It was a sanctuary of peace and hard-earned comfort, but the moment I unlocked the front door, that peace was shattered by a digital cacophony. My phone, which I had placed on the kitchen table, began to vibrate and ring with a violence that made it dance across the wood. Beside it, Beatrice's phone was lighting up in her purse, playing its cheerful ringtone over and over again. It was a relentless assault. I looked at the screen of my phone. The caller ID flashed the same name repeatedly: Terrence. Below his name were the notifications: 45 missed calls, 20 text messages. The numbers were climbing even as I watched. Beatrice stood by the door, clutching her purse to her chest as if it were a shield. Her eyes were wide and red-rimmed, darting between the 2 phones. She looked terrified, not of the noise, but of the rage she knew was waiting on the other end of the line. She reached out a trembling hand toward her purse, but I stopped her. I gently took her phone and set it to silent, placing it face down on the counter. "Let him ring," I said. My voice sounded gravelly and old to my own ears. "He is not going to stop Bernie," she whispered, tears leaking from her eyes again. "He is panicking. He is our son. We have to answer." I looked at the phone dancing on the table. It was not ringing out of concern. It was ringing out of entitlement. It was the sound of a spoiled child realizing the candy store had closed. I walked over to the table and pulled out a chair. I sat down heavily, my joints protesting after the tension of the drive. I watched the screen go dark for a split second before lighting up again. Call 46. I took a deep breath, the kind of breath you take before you open a furnace door to check the fire. I swiped the green button and pressed the speaker icon. I did not say hello. I did not ask how he was. I just let the connection open. The sound that came through the speaker was not a voice. It was a roar. "Are you insane, old man?" Terrence's voice was distorted by bad reception and pure, unadulterated fury, but it filled our kitchen. Beatrice flinched as if she had been slapped. "Did you cancel the card? Tell me you did not cancel the card right in the middle of the cocktail hour. Do you have any idea what you just did?" I remained silent. I wanted to hear him. I wanted to hear the man I raised. "Answer me, damn it," he screamed. "The manager is standing right here. He is threatening to shut down the bar. Everyone is looking at me. You are humiliating me. You humiliated yourself, Terrence," I said, my voice steady and cold. I saw the sign at the gate. "Do not let these two in." That is what it said. There was a pause on the line, a brief second, where the background noise of the wedding filtered through. I could hear the clinking of glasses and the murmur of confused guests. "So that is it," Terrence hissed, his tone shifting from panic to a venomous sneer. "You are being petty. You saw the sign and you got your feelings hurt, so now you are going to ruin the most important day of my life. You are a senile old fool." Beatrice let out a sob, covering her mouth with her hands. "We were bringing you a gift, son," she cried out. "We just wanted to wish you happiness." "Oh, stop it," Mom, Terrence snapped. "Do not play the victim. You know exactly why I did it. Look at you. You would have shown up in that rusted piece of junk truck wearing your church clothes, looking like you just crawled out of a basement. You do not fit in here. These are important people. Madison's family comes from money, real money, not whatever scraps you managed to save up. I was protecting you from embarrassing yourselves, and you repay me by cutting me off. I listened to him rewrite history in real time. He was twisting the knife, turning his cruelty into a virtue. He was trying to make us feel guilty for his shame. It was a masterclass in manipulation. You are protecting us, I repeated dryly, by putting our faces on a wanted poster like criminals. It was necessary, he shouted. You just do not get it. You never have. You are small people living small lives. I am trying to build something bigger here. I am trying to elevate the family name. But you are like anchors dragging me down. I did what I had to do to maintain the image. But that does not mean you get to steal my money. Your money, I asked. Yes, my money, he yelled. You promised to pay for this. That makes it mine. You cannot just give a gift and then snatch it back because you are throwing a tantrum. That is theft. You are stealing from me. You are stealing from Madison. The logic was so twisted, it was almost impressive. He genuinely believed that my labor, my savings, and my generosity were his birthright regardless of how he treated the source. He wanted the fruit, but he wanted to chop down the tree because it blocked his view. I want you to listen to me very carefully, Terrence, I said, leaning into the phone. The money is not yours. It never was. It was a gift based on the condition that we were family. You decided today that we are not family. You decided we are not good enough to breathe the same air as your guests. If we are not good enough to enter the building, we are certainly not good enough to pay for it. You are being ridiculous, he spat. Just turn the card back on, transfer the funds. Do it now and maybe I can salvage this. If you do it right now, I won't tell Madison's father that you are a vindictive old man who lost his mind. I will cover for you. He was bargaining now, but even his bargaining was a threat. He still thought he had the upper hand. He still thought he was the prize. No, I said. The word hung in the air, simple and absolute. What did you say, he asked, his voice dropping an octave. I said no. The bank is closed, Terrence. Permanently. Figure it out yourself. Ask your rich in-laws. Ask the important people, but do not ask me. There was a silence on the line that felt different than before. It was the silence of a predator realizing the cage door is locked. I could hear his heavy breathing. I could hear the desperation clawing at his throat. He knew he was cornered. He knew the bill was due, and his pockets were empty. And then he played his final card, the card he had been saving. The card all children think gives them absolute power over their parents. Fine, he said, his voice icy and low. Fine. You want to play hardball. Let us play. He took a breath, and I could almost see him sneering. Madison is pregnant. Beatrice gasped. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with a sudden, desperate hope. A grandchild. It was the one thing she had prayed for every night for 5 years. She is 2 months along. Terrence continued, letting the words sink in. We were going to announce it tonight during the speeches. We were going to name the baby after you, Dad. Bernard, if it was a boy. I looked at Beatrice. She was trembling. Her hands were reaching out toward the phone as if she could touch the baby through the speaker. Her face was a mixture of joy and agony. But now Terrence said, his voice sharpening into a blade, Listen to me, old man. If that money is not in my account in the next 5 minutes, if I have to face 1 second of humiliation out there because of you, you will never see this child. Do you hear me? You will never hold it. You will never know its name. You will die without ever meeting your grandchild. Beatrice let out a wail that tore through the kitchen. No, Terrence, please, no. Do not say that. We will pay. Bernie, pay him. It is the baby. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. She was pleading with me, begging me to surrender, to give in to the blackmail, to buy our way back into his heart. I looked at my wife. I saw the woman who had nursed him through fevers, who had sat in the stands at every baseball game, who had loved him with a ferocity that defied logic. And I saw her breaking. He was breaking her on purpose. He was using an innocent, unborn life as a weapon to extort money from the people who gave him life. I looked at the phone. I imagined the man on the other end. He was not my son. My son was a boy who used to cry when he found an injured bird. This man was a stranger, a monster who would sell his own child's affection for a catering bill. If I paid him now, it would never end. He would use that child as a hostage for the rest of my life. He would demand houses, cars, vacations, all in exchange for a visit. He would teach that child to see us as ATMs just like he did. The warmth in my chest, the little flame of hope that I had carried for him for 32 years flickered and went out. It turned into ash. I reached out and took Beatrice's hand. I squeezed it tight, anchoring her. She looked at me, expecting me to cave, expecting me to save the family. I leaned over the phone. My voice was calm. It was the calm of a judge delivering a death sentence. You are right, Terrence, I said. What he asked, confused. You are right, I repeated. I will not see the child. What? If this is the kind of man you are, I said, if this is the kind of father you are going to be, then that child is better off not knowing us. I will not be blackmailed by my own blood. Wait, Dad, he stammered. The arrogance suddenly gone, replaced by shock. You made your choice, I said. Now live with it. Dad, wait, do not hang. I pressed the red button. The call ended. The kitchen was silent again. Beatrice stared at me, her face pale, her mouth open in a silent scream of disbelief. I stood up and walked over to the sink, gripping the edge of the counter to keep my hands from shaking. I had just cut off my own limb to save the body. I had just orphaned myself. But as I looked out the window at the setting sun, I knew I had done the only thing a father could do. I had stopped enabling the monster I had created. The house was quiet, but it was not peaceful. Upstairs, I could hear the floorboards creak every few minutes, telling me that Beatrice was pacing the bedroom, unable to sleep. Her heart was breaking in real time, splintering under the weight of a son who had chosen strangers over his own blood. I sat in the kitchen for a long time, watching the digital clock on the microwave tick away the minutes. My own heart had stopped breaking hours ago. Now it was hardening, turning into the cold steel I had worked with for 40 years. I was not sad anymore. I was suspicious. Something about the way Madison's father had looked at me in the brief moments I had met him months ago did not sit right. He had that desperate shine in his eyes, the look of a man who is treading water and smiling while his legs cramp up. And Terrence. My son was a climber, but he was not a good liar. He had been too anxious, too eager to separate his financial background from his personal history. There was a piece of this puzzle missing, and I intended to find it. I stood up and walked quietly to the basement door. I unlocked it and descended the wooden stairs. To Terrence, this basement was just a place where I kept old paint cans and broken lawnmowers. To me, it was the archive of my life. Behind a stack of dusty boxes against the concrete wall was a floor safe bolted into the foundation. I spun the dial. Left, right, left. The heavy door clicked open. Inside were the deeds to my properties, the bonds, and a burner phone I kept for business dealings that required absolute discretion. I took the phone out and powered it on. The battery was still at 80%. I scrolled to a number I had not used since I retired from the steel mill. It belonged to Mike, a former private investigator who used to handle corporate espionage and security for the plant. Mike was the kind of man who could find a needle in a haystack and then tell you who manufactured the needle. I dialed the number. It rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. "Bernie, it is 3 in the morning. This better be good." "I need a full rundown, Mike," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "The subject is the Courtney family, Richard and Sylvia Courtney. Their daughter is Madison. They are supposed to be big-time hoteliers from the East Coast." I heard the rustle of sheets and the click of a lamp. "The in-laws?" Mike asked, his voice sharpening. "Did the wedding go south?" "The wedding went to hell," I said. "I need to know who these people really are. I need financials. I need lawsuits. I need debts. And I need it tonight." "That is a tall order, Bernie," Mike said. "The databases are asleep." "Wake them up," I said. "I am wiring $10,000 to your offshore account right now. I want everything you can find. Dig deep. I have a feeling they are not who they say they are." "Give me 2 hours," Mike said. I hung up and sat in the old leather armchair I kept down there. I listened to the hum of the furnace. I waited. I did not go back upstairs to comfort my wife because I knew I could not offer her comfort until I had the truth. I needed ammunition. Terrence had fired the first shot by banning us, but I was going to make sure I won the war. At exactly 3:15 in the morning, the burner phone buzzed. It was an encrypted email from Mike. The subject line was simply, "The Royal Family." I opened the attachment. It was a 50-page PDF. As I began to read, the cold air of the basement seemed to drop another 10 degrees. The report was an autopsy of a financial corpse. The Courtney Hospitality Group, the empire that Terrence had bragged about for months, was a smoking crater. They had declared Chapter 11 bankruptcy 2 years ago. Their flagship hotels had been seized by creditors. Their vacation homes were in foreclosure. Richard Courtney was currently facing 3 separate lawsuits for fraud and embezzlement involving vendor contracts. They were not just broke. They were drowning. They were millions of dollars in the hole and digging deeper every day. I scrolled down to the personal section. Their credit cards were maxed out. They had liens on their vehicles. They were living on a line of credit that was days away from being severed. They were destitute frauds parading around in rented tuxedos and leased luxury cars. But the real dagger was on page 42. Mike had included a summary of their recent communications in social circles. It seemed the Courtneys had been bragging to their remaining friends about their daughter's engagement. They were not bragging about Terrence's charm or his marketing job. They were bragging about his background. According to the report, Terrence had told Madison and her parents that his father was not a retired engineer. He had told them I was a silent partner in a massive oil refinery operation in the Gulf. He told them I was eccentric, that I liked to dress poor and drive old trucks to stay humble, but that I was sitting on a fortune of over $50 million. I sat back in the chair staring at the glowing screen. The pieces slammed into place with the force of a sledgehammer. Terrence was a liar. He had invented a fantasy father to impress a woman who was inventing a fantasy life. He had sold them a lie about generational wealth, and they had bought it because they were desperate for a bailout. The Courtneys did not hate me because I was black or because I was working class. They hated me because they were terrified I would show up and ruin the illusion Terrence had built. They needed to believe the lie. They needed Terrence to be their golden goose. They pushed for the wedding, they pushed for the luxury, they pushed to keep me away, not just out of snobbery, but out of survival instinct. They were predators looking for a fresh kill to feed their debts, and my son had walked right into their jaws wearing a suit I paid for. I read the report again, looking for any redeeming quality, any sign that Madison actually loved him. There was none. There were text logs retrieved from a cloud leak Mike had accessed. Madison complaining to her mother about Terrence's cheap taste. Madison asking her father how long they had to wait after the wedding before they could ask Terrence for a loan to cover the legal fees. They were going to bleed him dry, and since Terrence did not actually have the $50 million he claimed I had, they were going to bleed me dry through him. The monthly allowance I sent him, the house down payment, the wedding costs. It was all going into a black hole of Courtney debt. I put the phone down on the table. My hands were steady, but my stomach was churning. My son was a traitor. He had denied his own parents, erased his history, and treated us like garbage to gain entry into a club that was already burning to the ground. He was ashamed of the honest money I earned with my sweat so he could pretend to have dishonest money he never earned. But he was also a victim. He was the mark in a long con. He thought he was marrying a princess, but he was marrying a parasite. He thought he was climbing the social ladder, but he was stepping onto a trapdoor. I looked up at the ceiling toward the kitchen where he had sat and demanded money just hours ago. I thought about the grandson he threatened to keep from me. That child would be born into a house of cards. A surge of protective instinct flared up in my chest, the urge to rush out and save him, to show him the file, to scream the truth. But then I remembered the sign. Do not let these two in. I remembered his voice on the phone telling me he chose them over us. He had made his choice. He had bought his ticket. He wanted to be a Courtney so badly that he destroyed his name as a Freeman. I closed the safe and locked it. I stood up and smoothed out my flannel shirt. I would not save him. Not this time. If I bailed him out now, he would never learn. He would never see the truth. He needed to hit the bottom. He needed to crash into the reality he had created. He needed to be sitting in a motel room realizing that his wife was a fraud and his in-laws were leeches. I walked back up the stairs, turning off the basement light. I was leaving the darkness behind, but I knew Terrence was just entering his. I went into the bedroom where Beatrice was finally dozing fitfully. I laid down beside her and stared at the ceiling. The ship was sinking. The rats were already on board, and I had just canceled the only lifeboat. Not a single penny would go to save that vessel. Let it burn. Let him see the ashes. Only then could he maybe, just maybe, become a man. The Sunday morning sun did not bring warmth to our house. It brought a harsh, exposing light that made the shadows in the corners look deeper. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of black coffee that had gone cold hours ago. My laptop was open in front of me, glowing with the blue light of my banking portal. Beatrice was still in bed upstairs, probably staring at the ceiling and praying for a miracle that was not coming. I was not praying. I was reading the autopsy report of my son's wedding night. I clicked on the transaction history for the supplementary platinum card I had frozen the evening before. The digital trail told a story more vivid than any photograph. It was a timeline of humiliation and desperate clawing for status. At 11:45 post-meridian, there was a declined transaction at the Grand Estate for $45,000. That was the moment the music died. That was the moment the manager pulled the plug. I could imagine the scene, the waiters clearing plates before people were finished, the lights coming on full brightness, stripping away the romantic ambiance, the guests whispering, grabbing their purses, and making hasty exits, leaving the bride and groom standing in the wreckage of their vanity. But the story did not end there. The log showed a flurry of activity after midnight. At 12:30 in the morning, there was an attempted charge at the Ritz-Carlton downtown. $800. Declined. Terrence had tried to salvage the night. He had tried to take his new bride to the most expensive hotel in the city, probably to escape the shame of the venue, but the card was dead. At 1:15 there was another attempt, the Hyatt Regency. $400. Declined. He was lowering his standards, moving down the ladder of luxury, trying to find a place that would accept a maxed-out personal card, or perhaps hoping the system glitch would fix itself. It did not. And then the final entry. At 2:45 in the morning. A charge of $69.50. It was not on the platinum card. It was a debit transaction from his personal checking account, which I monitored but did not control. The merchant name was unambiguous. Motel 6, Highway, Exit 4. I stared at the screen. My son, the man who refused to let his parents into his wedding because we looked too working class, spent his wedding night in a roadside motel next to a truck stop. He had gone from champagne dreams to vending machine realities in less than 6 hours. His in-laws, the so-called wealthy Courtneys, clearly had not stepped up to pay for a hotel suite. They were likely scrambling to save their own skins, leaving the newlyweds to rot. I closed the laptop, feeling a grim sense of satisfaction. It was petty, perhaps, but it was also justice. He wanted to live a life of illusion, and now he was sleeping on polyester sheets in a room that smelled of stale cigarettes. He had banned the people who loved him, and now he was surrounded by strangers who did not care if he lived or died. My phone buzzed on the table, breaking my concentration. I looked at the screen, expecting another plea or perhaps an apology born of morning clarity. I was wrong. It was a text message from Terrence. I picked up the phone and read the words. They were not the words of a son. They were the words of a litigant. You think you won, old man. You think cutting me off makes you powerful. I spoke to a lawyer this morning. There are laws in this state about filial responsibility. Look it up. Children are required to support indigent parents, but the law works both ways when it comes to care. You are 70 years old. Soon you are going to need someone to sign your medical forms. You are going to need someone to manage your care when you get sick. Do not force me to be ruthless. If you do not fix this financial mess by noon, I will make sure you rot in a state facility when the time comes. I will be the one making the decisions about your life support. Remember that." I read the message twice. My hand did not shake. My heart did not race. Instead, a cold calm settled over me. He was threatening me with my own mortality. He was weaponizing my future death to extort money from me today. He was not just ungrateful, he was delusional. He truly believed I was a helpless old man teetering on the edge of senility, waiting for him to take control. He had no idea who he was dealing with. He thought he was playing chess, but he did not even know what board we were on. He assumed that because I drove an old truck, I was destitute. He assumed that because I was quiet, I was weak. He was about to learn that silence is where the real power lives. I stood up and walked to the hallway closet. I reached to the top shelf and pulled down a heavy steel lockbox. I carried it to the table and set it down next to my coffee. I dialed the combination. Click, click, click. The lid popped open. Inside were the deeds to the commercial properties I owned, the warehouse district, the logistics center, and one other file. A blue folder labeled simply Residential Assets. I opened the folder and pulled out a thick stack of documents. On top was a deed of trust. I smoothed the paper out on the table. It was the deed to the penthouse apartment in the Skyview Tower downtown, the apartment where Terrence and Madison had been living for the past 2 years. Terrence believed that his company paid for that apartment. He believed he was such a high-value executive that they rented a $5,000 a month penthouse just to keep him happy. He had bragged about it to everyone. He had invited Madison's parents there to show off his success. What he did not know was that the company leasing the apartment to him was a shell corporation called BF Holdings. Bernard Freeman Holdings. I had bought that unit 5 years ago as an investment property. When Terrence got his marketing job, I approached his boss privately. I offered to subsidize Terrence's housing as a silent bonus. I told his boss to tell Terrence it was a corporate perk. I wanted my son to live safely. I wanted him to have a good start. I paid the mortgage. I paid the HOA fees. I paid the taxes. He paid nothing. I looked at the deed. I looked at his name listed only as a tenant at will. He had no lease. He had no rights. He was a guest in my house, and he had just threatened to pull the plug on my life support. A small dark smile touched my lips. He wanted to talk about laws. He wanted to talk about ruthless decisions. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for the building management office of the Skyview Tower. It was Sunday, but I knew the building manager personally. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Freeman, good morning. To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Good morning, David," I said. "I need you to do something for me immediately." "Name it, Mr. Freeman." "The tenants in Unit 42B, Terrence Freeman and Madison Courtney." "Yes, sir." "Is there a maintenance issue?" "No, David. There is an ownership issue. I am terminating the occupancy agreement effective immediately. They have violated the morality clause of the unwritten contract. I want the locks changed within the hour." There was a pause on the line. Sir David said, his voice cautious. "That is your son. It is Sunday. They are not even home." "I saw them leave yesterday for the wedding." "I know," I said. "They are currently at a Motel 6 off the highway. When they return, I do not want their keys to work. I want their belongings packed in bags and placed in the lobby, not in the secure storage room, in the lobby, where everyone can see." "Mr. Freeman, are you sure? This is drastic." "They threatened my wife, David," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "They dishonored my family. I want them out. If they cause a scene, call the police. Tell them the owner has revoked their access." "Understood, sir. I will send the maintenance team up now." "Thank you, David." I hung up the phone. I looked at the text message from Terrence one last time. He thought he could scare me with the future. He thought he could hold my old age hostage. He forgot that I controlled his present. I looked at the deed on the table. It was just a piece of paper, but in that moment it was a sword. I had shielded him from the harshness of the world for 32 years. I had built a roof over his head that he did not even know I paid for. I had let him play the big shot executive while I paid the bills from the shadows. That ended today. He wanted to be a big man. He wanted to be a Courtney. He wanted to be superior. Fine. He could be all of those things from the sidewalk. I closed the file and put it back in the lockbox. I snapped the lid shut. The sound was loud in the quiet kitchen. It sounded like a gavel coming down. I stood up and went to the sink to pour out my cold coffee. I rinsed the mug and set it in the drying rack. Then I went to the refrigerator and took out the ingredients to make breakfast for Beatrice. She would need her strength. The war was far from over, but we had just won the first major battle. We had reclaimed our territory. And when Terence and his bride tried to go home to their ivory tower, they were going to find out that the landlord was the very man they had tried to erase. Monday morning arrived with the sound of gravel crunching under expensive tires. I was sitting in my usual spot by the front window sipping tea and watching the street. A sleek black BMW sedan pulled into my driveway parking right next to my battered Ford truck. The contrast was so sharp it almost looked like a staged photograph representing the divide between the life I lived and the life my son desperately wanted. A young white man stepped out of the car. He looked to be in his late 20s, perhaps early 30s. He was wearing a navy blue suit that was tailored a little too tight, and his shoes were polished to a mirror shine. He stepped carefully, avoiding a small oil stain on the concrete, and looked up at my house with an expression that sat somewhere between pity and disgust. He checked his watch, adjusted his tie, and marched toward the front door with the stride of a man who believes he owns the ground he walks on. Beatrice was in the kitchen washing dishes. Her hands were shaking again. She had spent the night crying over the loss of her son and the unborn grandchild she would never know. I walked over to her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Go upstairs, Bea," I said softly. "I will handle this." She looked at me with fear in her eyes. "Who is it, Bernie? Is it the police?" "No," I said. "It is something worse. It is a lawyer." I waited until I heard her bedroom door close upstairs before I went to the front door. The knocking was aggressive, 3 sharp raps that demanded attention. I took a deep breath. I hunched my shoulders forward slightly. I let my hands tremble. I adjusted my glasses so they sat crooked on my nose. If they wanted to paint me as a senile old man, I would give them the performance of a lifetime. I opened the door, slowly. "Mr. Bernard Freeman," this young man asked. He did not offer a hand to shake. He held a leather briefcase in front of him like a weapon. "Yes, that is me," I said, my voice pitching up a little higher than normal. "Can I help you, son? My name is Mr. Harrington. I am the legal representative for your son, Terence Freeman, and his wife, Madison. We need to talk, now." I stepped back and gestured for him to enter. He walked into my living room, and his eyes immediately scanned the space. He saw the old floral sofa, the CRT television I kept for nostalgia, and the faded carpet. He smirked. It was a small, barely perceptible twitch of his lips, but I saw it. He had already assessed my net worth based on my furniture, and he had calculated that I was an easy target. "Please sit down," I said, pointing to the armchair. "Can I get you some water, or maybe a cookie? Beatrice just made them." "No, thank you," Harrington said, sitting on the edge of the chair as if he were afraid of catching a disease. "Let us skip the pleasantries. I am here to discuss the significant financial and emotional damages you inflicted upon my clients this past weekend." He placed his briefcase on his lap and snapped the latches open. He pulled out a thick document stapled at the top. "Your actions on Saturday were not only malicious, but they constitute a breach of verbal contract and intentional infliction of emotional distress." He began, his voice taking on that rehearsed cadence lawyers use when they want to intimidate someone. "You verbally committed to funding a wedding. My clients relied on that promise. They entered into contracts based on that promise. When you capriciously revoked those funds in the middle of the event, you caused them public humiliation, loss of reputation, and severe psychological trauma." I blinked rapidly, feigning confusion. "But sir," I said, "they put a sign up. They said I could not come in. I just went home." "That is irrelevant," Harrington snapped. "Your attendance was not a condition of the funding. The money was a gift. Once a gift is promised and relied upon, it becomes a binding obligation under certain interpretations of the law. You stranded them. You exposed them to ridicule. Madison has been under a doctor's care for severe anxiety since Saturday night." He slid the document across the coffee table toward me. "This is a demand letter, Mr. Freeman. We are seeking immediate restitution for the wedding costs totaling $53,000 plus an additional $47,000 in punitive damages for pain and suffering. That is a total of $100,000. If you agree to pay this sum within 48 hours, we will not file a civil lawsuit." $100,000, I whispered, clutching my chest. I do not have that kind of money. I am just a retired worker. Look at this place. Harrington leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. He smelled blood. We know you have assets, Mr. Freeman. We know you own this house free and clear. We know you have a pension. And quite frankly, we suspect you have been hiding money from your son for years. But that brings me to the second matter. He pulled out another document. This one was thinner but far more dangerous. Terrence is very concerned about your mental state. His voice dripped with false sympathy. He told me about your erratic behavior lately. The hoarding, the paranoia, the sudden outbursts of anger, forgetting promises you made. These are classic signs of early onset dementia. I stared at him, my mouth slightly open. They were playing the card I had anticipated. They were trying to question my sanity to invalidate my decisions. I am not crazy, I stammered. I just forget my keys sometimes. It is more than keys, Mr. Freeman, Harrington said. You forgot you promised to pay for a wedding. You forgot that you are a father. Terrence believes you are no longer capable of managing your own affairs. He is filing a petition for emergency guardianship. He wants to protect you. He wants to make sure your remaining assets are not squandered or lost due to your cognitive decline. I looked down at my hands, letting them shake violently. He wants to take my rights away, I asked, my voice trembling. He wants to be your conservator, Harrington corrected. He would manage your accounts, your property, and your health care. He would make sure you are placed in a facility that can give you the care you obviously need. This house is too much for you. The maintenance alone is a hazard. I saw the trap clearly now. It was a pincer movement. Either I paid them the $100,000 voluntarily, or they would have me declared incompetent, seize control of my finances, sell my house, and take the money anyway while locking me away in a nursing home. It was ruthless. It was evil. And it was exactly what I expected from a desperate man and his shark lawyer. But why, I asked, looking up at Harrington with tears in my eyes, why does he need the money so bad? I thought he had a good job. I thought Madison was rich. Harrington sighed. He looked at his watch. He was getting impatient with the senile old man act. He decided to apply the pressure. Look, Mr. Freeman, let us be real. Your son is in a bind, a serious bind. He has creditors breathing down his neck, and not just the credit card companies. He borrowed money to pay for the deposits, high-interest money. He leaned in closer, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. He borrowed $50,000 from a private lender 3 months ago. He needed it to secure the venue and the vendors because you were taking too long to release the funds. He signed a promissory note. It is due next week. If he does not pay, he is in physical danger. Do you understand? I nodded, slowly absorbing this new piece of information. Terrence had gone to a loan shark. That explained the desperation. That explained the panic. But how did he get a loan like that? I asked innocently. He does not own anything. Collateral. You need collateral for big loans, right? Harrington rolled his eyes. He was getting sloppy. He thought he had already won, so he stopped filtering his words. He used the equity in this house, Mr. Freeman. The room went still. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to stop. This house, I asked. But this house belongs to me and Beatrice. His name is not on the deed. Harrington shrugged, a smirk playing on his lips. He had a power of attorney document. He said you signed it a year ago when you had that scare with your heart. He used that to secure the loan against this property. Now I have seen the document. It looks valid to me. But if you are claiming you do not remember signing it, well, that just supports our argument for dementia, does it not? You signed away your house and forgot about it. There it was, the smoking gun, the confession. My son had forged my signature. He had created a fraudulent power of attorney document. He had mortgaged the home I had built with my own hands to pay for a party I was not allowed to attend. And this lawyer, this officer of the court, was sitting in my living room admitting that he knew about it and using it as leverage to extort me. He thought I was trapped. He thought that if I denied signing it, I proved I was crazy. And if I admitted signing it, I lost the house. I looked at Harrington. I looked at his cheap shoes. I looked at his arrogant face. And I decided the show was over. I stopped shaking. I sat up straight in my chair, my shoulders squared. The confused look vanished from my eyes, replaced by the hard stare of a man who used to stare down blast furnaces. I reached forward to the coffee table. There was a plate of oatmeal cookies sitting there. I lifted the plate. Underneath it was a small black digital voice recorder. The red light was steady and unblinking. It had been recording since the moment he walked in. I picked up the recorder and pressed the stop button. The click was loud in the quiet room. Harrington stared at the device. His smirk faltered. "What is that?" "That is evidence, Mr. Harrington," I said. My voice was deep and steady. "That is a confession to conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and knowledge of a forged legal document." Harrington's face went pale. He stood up abruptly, knocking his knee against the coffee table. "You cannot record me. That is illegal. I did not consent to that." "This is a one-party consent state, son," I said, standing up. "I checked the statutes before you arrived, and even if it were not, you just admitted to a felony in my living room. Attorney-client privilege does not cover you when you are actively participating in a crime against a third party." I walked toward him. He took a step back, his arrogance evaporating like steam. "You said Terrence signed a loan against my house," I said, advancing on him. "You said you saw the document. You knew it was forged because I never signed a power of attorney in my life. And instead of reporting it, you came here to blackmail me. You came here to threaten a senior citizen with a nursing home if he did not pay off an illegal loan. Mr. Freeman." "Wait," Harrington stammered, raising his hands. "You misunderstood. I was just speaking hypothetically." "Get out," I said. I pointed to the door. "Get out of my house, and tell my son that he just made the biggest mistake of his life. He did not just steal from me. He stole from the bank that holds the title to this house. Because unlike what you think, I do not own this house free and clear in my personal name. It is held by a trust. And banks do not like it when people forge liens against their assets." Harrington grabbed his briefcase. He was sweating now. He fumbled with the doorknob. "I am going to report you to the Bar Association by the close of business today," I said. "And I am taking this recording to the district attorney. You wanted to talk about the law. Now you are going to experience it." He threw the door open and practically ran to his car. He did not look back. He did not check for puddles. He jumped into his BMW and sped away, kicking up gravel and dust. I watched him go. I felt a cold, hard satisfaction in my chest. They had tried to take my dignity. They had tried to take my freedom. Now they were going to lose theirs. I closed the door and locked it. I went to the kitchen and poured the tea down the drain. I did not need tea. I needed to make a call. The war had just escalated from a family dispute to a criminal investigation, and I was the lead witness. Terrence and Madison drove back into the city with the desperate energy of cornered animals. They had checked out of the roadside motel, leaving behind the smell of stale smoke and failure, but they carried their panic with them like luggage. I knew exactly what they were thinking because I knew exactly what they owned. They were heading to the penthouse at Skyview Tower, not to rest, but to liquidate. Over the last 3 years, I had watched the bank statements. I knew about the 3 Hermes Birkin bags sitting in Madison's closet, each costing more than my first house. I knew about the Rolex Submariner Terrence wore on his wrist, a watch he claimed was a gift from a client, but which I knew was purchased with the emergency fund I had set up for him. They had thousands of dollars in designer clothes, jewelry, and electronics sitting in that apartment. It was their last asset. Their plan was simple. They would grab everything they could carry, take it to a high-end pawn shop or a consignment dealer, and get enough cash to pay off the loan shark and maybe hire a lawyer to fight me. They pulled the rental car up to the curb in front of the building, leaving it running in the loading zone. They did not even bother to park. They rushed through the revolving glass doors, marching across the marble lobby with their heads down, trying to avoid eye contact with the concierge. They looked like royalty in exile, disheveled and frantic. They reached the private elevator bank that serviced the penthouse levels. Terrence pulled out his key fob, the black plastic rectangle that he loved to flash at bars to prove his status. He slapped it against the sensor pad, waiting for the satisfying beep and the green light that meant he was home. Instead, the sensor flashed a harsh, unforgiving red. Terrence frowned. He wiped the fob on his pants and tried again. Red light. He tried a third time, jamming it against the plastic. Red light. Madison let out a groan of frustration. "What are you doing, Terrence? We do not have time for this. Just use the keypad code." Terrence punched in the 6-digit code, 199200, his birth year and mine. The irony was not lost on me even from a distance. "Access denied" flashed across the small digital screen. He tried again. "Access denied." "This is ridiculous," Terrence muttered, his voice rising. "The system must be down." He turned toward the front desk, ready to scream at the concierge, but before he could take a step, he was intercepted. 3 large men in dark tactical uniforms stepped out from the security alcove. They were not the usual building security guards. These men were private contractors. I had hired them through Mike specifically for this moment. They formed a wall between my son and the elevators. Mr. Freeman, the lead guard, said, his voice flat and professional. "You are trespassing. You need to leave the premises immediately." Terrence laughed, a high-pitched, nervous sound. "Trespassing. I live here. I am the tenant in Penthouse B. My key is not working and I want it fixed right now. Do you know who I am?" "We know exactly who you are, sir," the guard replied. "And we know that your occupancy agreement was terminated at 9 o'clock this morning." "Terminated," Terrence shouted, causing heads to turn in the lobby. "You cannot terminate a lease on a Sunday. That is illegal. I have rights. I want to speak to the landlord. Call the management company right now." The guard reached into his jacket pocket. He did not pull out a phone. He pulled out a single sheet of paper folded once. He handed it to Terrence. "This is your official notice of eviction," the guard said. Terrence snatched the paper and unfolded it. Madison leaned over his shoulder, reading frantically. "Pursuant to the morality clause within the occupancy agreement regarding Unit 42B, the landlord hereby exercises the right to immediate termination. The tenants have engaged in conduct deemed detrimental to the family values and integrity of the property owner. All access rights are revoked effective immediately." "Morality clause," Terrence sputtered, his face turning red. "What kind of joke is this? There is no morality clause in my lease. I demand to go up to my apartment. My things are up there. My life is up there. Your things are not up there, sir," the guard said, crossing his arms. "The unit has already been cleared." "Cleared," Madison shrieked. "You touched my things. That is theft. I am calling the police." "Please do," the guard said calmly. "We have the work order signed by the owner. Everything was packed under supervision." "Where is it?" Terrence demanded, stepping forward aggressively. "Where is my stuff?" The guard pointed toward the large glass windows at the front of the lobby looking out onto the side street. "Your belongings have been placed in the designated waste management zone." Terrence and Madison ran to the window. There, on the sidewalk, piled haphazardly in clear industrial trash bags, was their entire life. I could see the orange leather of a Hermes bag pressed against the plastic. I saw the sleeve of a tuxedo. I saw their wedding gifts thrown into a heap like common garbage. They spun around, ready to attack the guards, but the men did not flinch. "You have 30 minutes to collect your property," the guard said, checking his watch. "The city sanitation truck is scheduled for a pickup at noon." Terrence pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He dialed the number for BF Holdings, the mysterious shell company he had sent his rent checks to for 2 years. He put the phone to his ear, his face twisted in a mask of pure rage. I watched my own phone light up on the kitchen table. The caller ID said Terrence. I picked it up. I did not say hello. "Who is this?" Terrence screamed into the phone. "I am going to sue you. I am going to burn your company to the ground. You cannot throw my wife's things on the street. Do you know who my father is? He is a powerful man." I let out a low, dry chuckle. "I know exactly who your father is, Terrence," I said into the receiver. Terrence stopped breathing. The silence on the line was absolute. He pulled the phone away from his ear, staring at it as if it had turned into a snake. Then he put it back, slowly. "Dad." "Hello, son," I said. "Or should I say tenant?" "No," Terrence whispered. "No, that is impossible. You are calling me from the management office. You must be there." "I am in my kitchen, Terrence," I said, drinking coffee and watching the clock. "You have 28 minutes before the garbage truck arrives." "But BF Holdings," Terrence stammered. "That is a corporation. They own the building." "BF stands for Bernard Freeman," I said. "I bought that apartment 5 years ago. I set up the company to give you a place to live. I paid the mortgage. I paid the taxes. I paid the insurance. I let you play the big shot executive while I paid your rent." "You own the penthouse," Madison screamed from the background, her voice piercing through the phone. Her world was collapsing. The father-in-law she had mocked, the man she had called a dirty laborer, was the owner of the ivory tower she lived in. "I own the building, Madison," I said, my voice cold and hard. "I own the roof over your head, and I just decided that I do not want tenants who ban me from their weddings." "Dad, please." Terrence begged, the fight draining out of him. "Our passports are in those bags. My laptop. The jewelry." "Then you better start digging," I said. Because the truck driver is always on time. I hung up the phone. I did not need to see them to know what was happening. I knew they were running out the door, scrambling onto the sidewalk, tearing open trash bags in a panic, trying to salvage their status from the gutter, while the neighbors watched from their balconies. They wanted a spectacle. They got one. It was Tuesday evening when the desperation finally drove them to my doorstep. The rain had been falling steadily since noon, turning the dust in my driveway into a slick gray mud. I was sitting in the living room with the lights off, watching the security monitors I had installed the day after the wedding. Beatrice was in the kitchen pretending to read a Bible, but I knew she was just staring at the pages, waiting for the phone to ring or for a car to pull up. She still had hope. Mothers always do. They keep a small secret room in their hearts where their children are always innocent, no matter how much blood is on their hands. A pair of headlights cut through the darkness, sweeping across the front window. It was not a luxury car this time. It was a beige economy sedan, a rental with a dent in the rear bumper. It looked like the kind of car Terrence would have sneered at a week ago. Now it was his lifeline. I watched the screen as the car doors opened. Terrence stepped out first. He was wearing jeans and a hooded sweatshirt, looking nothing like the corporate executive he pretended to be. He looked tired. His shoulders were slumped and his movements were jerky. Madison climbed out of the passenger side. She was not wearing designer heels. She was wearing sneakers and a simple dress, and she had pulled her hair back into a messy bun. It was a costume. I knew it immediately. They had dressed down to look humble, to look broken, to look like children coming home after a hard lesson. They walked up the path to the porch, avoiding the puddles. They did not know that the camera above the door was a 4K resolution lens with high dynamic range audio. I could hear them breathing. I could see the raindrops on their eyelashes. Beatrice heard the car. She came rushing into the living room, her eyes wide. "Is it them, Bernie?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded. I pointed to the screen. "Do not open the door, B," I said. "We watch from here. We listen first." The doorbell rang. It echoed through the silent house like a gunshot. Beatrice flinched, but she moved toward the door. I caught her wrist gently but firmly. "No," I said. "We use the intercom." I pressed the button on the wall panel. The speaker on the porch crackled to life. "State your business," I said, my voice rough. Dad Terrence's voice came through the speakers, sounding wet and thick. "Dad, please open the door. We have nowhere to go. It is raining. We are freezing. Go to a hotel," I said. "We cannot." Terrence sobbed. His acting was getting better, or maybe the reality of sleeping in a car was finally hitting him. "Our cards are blocked. We have no cash. The hotel kicked us out. Please, Dad, just let us in. We need to talk. We need to apologize properly." I looked at Beatrice. She was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. She looked at the monitor, at her son shivering on the porch. "Bernie, please," she whispered. "It is raining. Let them in. Just to talk." I hesitated. I wanted to leave them out there. I wanted them to wash away in the storm, but I also needed to see this play out. I needed to see how far they would go. I pressed the button again. "I am not unlocking the door," I said. "You can talk from there. If you have something to say it to the camera." Madison stepped forward, then pushing Terrence slightly aside, she looked directly up at the lens. Her face was streaked with rain and what looked like tears. She clasped her hands together in front of her chest in a gesture of prayer. "Mr. Freeman, Mrs. Freeman." She began, her voice shaking perfectly. "I am so sorry. I am so incredibly sorry. I know I messed up. I know I was disrespectful." She took a ragged breath, wiping her eyes. "It was a cultural misunderstanding," she said. "I did not understand how things work in your family. I grew up differently. I was stressed about the wedding, about everything being perfect. I did not mean to hurt you. I was just overwhelmed. I thought the sign was a joke, a bad joke that Terrence's friends put up. I did not know it would hurt you like this." I stared at the screen. A cultural misunderstanding. That was the code word for racism wrapped in politeness. She was blaming her upbringing, her stress, anything but her own malice. She was calling my dignity a joke. Terrence jumped in, sensing that her apology was not landing. "It was my fault, Dad," he said. "It was the pressure at work. The merger was falling apart and I took it out on you. I was not thinking straight. I love you guys. You know I love you. I just wanted to impress Madison's parents. I lost my way. But we learned our lesson. We lost the apartment. We lost our stuff. We have nothing left but family. Please, do not turn your back on family." Beatrice was sobbing openly now. She reached for the door handle. "They learned, Bernie," she said. "Look at them. They are suffering. He is my boy." I kept my hand on hers, keeping the lock engaged. "Not yet," I said, and then they played it. The ace in the hole, the nuclear option. Madison reached into her purse, which was wet and stained. She pulled out a small black and white photograph. She held it up to the camera, pressing it against the glass of the lens so it filled the entire screen on my monitor. It was an ultrasound image, a grainy gray blur that showed the outline of a fetus. "We went to the clinic this morning," Madison said, her voice dropping to a reverent whisper. "We wanted to make sure the stress did not hurt the baby. It is a boy, Mrs. Freeman. You are going to have a grandson." Beatrice let out a gasp that sounded like physical pain. She fell to her knees in front of the door, her hands pressed against the wood as if she could feel the heartbeat through the oak. "A boy," she wept. "A grandson." "Oh, Bernie, look." Terrence's voice came through softer now, more manipulative. "He is healthy, Mom. He has a strong heartbeat. We want him to know you. We want him to grow up in this house. We want him to have his grandparents. We cannot raise him in a car. Please open the door for him." Beatrice looked up at me, her face shining with hope and desperation. "Bernie," she pleaded, "it is a baby, an innocent baby. We cannot leave a baby in the rain. Open the door, please. If you love me, open the door." She began to stand up, her hand gripping the deadbolt. She was going to open it. Her motherly instinct had overridden every logic circuit in her brain. She saw a baby and she forgot the monsters holding the picture. I looked at the monitor. I looked at Terrence's face, which was twisted into a mask of pathetic sorrow, and then I looked at Madison. Terrence had stepped forward to lean his forehead against the door, playing the broken sun. Madison had stepped back slightly, thinking she was out of the direct line of sight, thinking the moment belonged to her husband. She had lowered the ultrasound photo. She was holding her phone in her other hand. I saw her thumb moving rapidly. "Wait," I said, my voice sharp. I grabbed Beatrice's hand just as she turned the latch. "Stop," I commanded. "Bernie, let me go," she cried, struggling against me. "Look at the screen, Beatrice," I shouted. "Look at the screen right now." I pulled my iPad from the side table. It was connected to the same security system, but it allowed me to zoom. I tapped the screen, focusing on Madison. I pinched and zoomed in on her hands. The 4K resolution held steady. The image was crystal clear. She was texting someone. I zoomed in further until the screen of her phone filled my display. The white text on the blue background was legible. It was sharp enough to read every hateful letter. Beatrice stopped struggling. She looked at the iPad. She squinted through her tears. "Read it," I said, my voice ice cold. "Read what she is writing." Beatrice leaned in. Her lips moved as she read the words. "Almost there. The old hag is crying. I can hear her through the door. Just endure 1 hour of their preaching. Once I get the key to the wall safe, we can drug their tea. We will kick these 2 old black fools to the nursing home by morning." Beatrice froze. The breath left her body in a long, shuddering exhale. She stared at the words. Old hag. Drug their tea. Old black fools. The illusion shattered. The grandmotherly hope died a violent, instant death. She did not look at me. She looked at the door. She looked at the wood separating her from the people she had wanted to save. Her face changed. The sorrow evaporated, replaced by a horror so deep it looked like rage. She pulled her hand away from the lock. She stepped back. She straightened her spine. She wiped her face with her sleeve, drying the tears instantly. "Do it," she whispered to me. "Do it, Bernie." I picked up the microphone for the intercom. I pressed the button. "That is a very touching performance," I said, my voice booming through the porch speakers. "You almost had us." Terrence looked up, hopeful. "Dad." "But I have a question, Madison," I said. Madison looked at the camera, startled. "Yes, Mr. Freeman. Who were you texting just now?" I asked. "Was it your mother? Or was it the nursing home intake coordinator?" Madison's face went white. She tried to hide the phone behind her back, but it was too late. "I saw the text, Madison," I said. "I saw it on the 4K Zoom. Just endure 1 hour. Drug the tea. Kick the old black fools out." Terrence spun around, looking at his wife, his mouth dropping open. "You idiot!" he hissed at her, not realizing the microphone could hear him too. "You were texting. You are not coming in," I said, my voice rising with the fury of 1,000 storms. "You are not touching my safe. You are not touching my tea. And you are definitely not touching my wife." But the baby, Terrence shouted, trying to pivot back to the script. The baby needs a home. There is no baby, I said. What? Terrence stammered. I pulled up the report Mike had sent me an hour ago. The background check included medical records from the clinic they claimed to have visited. I have your medical file, Madison. You had a tubal ligation 2 years ago. You cannot get pregnant. That ultrasound picture is a stock photo from Google Images. I found the exact same one on the first page of search results. Beatrice gasped again, but this time it was a gasp of pure disgust. You lied about a child, she screamed at the door. You lied about a life. Get off my porch, I said. Dad, please, Terrence begged, pounding on the wood. We have nowhere else. I do not care, I said. I reached for the control panel on the wall. I pressed the button that activated the perimeter floodlights and the siren alarm I had installed for emergencies. You have 10 seconds before I release the hounds, I lied. I did not have hounds, but they did not know that. I am calling the police, I added, for trespassing and for attempted poisoning. I have the text message saved. The siren began to wail, a deafening warble that shook the windows. The floodlights turned the porch into a blinding stage. Terrence and Madison scrambled backward, shielding their eyes. They looked at the camera one last time, their faces twisted in hatred and defeat. Then they turned and ran. They ran through the mud, slipping and sliding back to their cheap rental car. I watched them go. I watched the taillights fade into the rain. I turned off the alarm. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was the silence of a fortress that had held the line. Beatrice walked over to me. She put her head on my chest. She did not cry. They are gone, she said. Yes, I said. They are gone. And they are never coming back. Wednesday morning brought a silence that felt heavy and thick, like the air before a tornado touches down. I was in the kitchen sweeping up the mud tracks from the night before while Beatrice sat in the living room staring blankly at the dark television screen. We were tired. We were bone-deep weary from the siege of our own making. I thought the worst was over. I thought sending them running into the rain was the end of the battle. I was wrong. The battle had just moved to a battlefield I did not understand. The internet. My phone buzzed on the counter. Then it buzzed again. And again. Within seconds, it was vibrating continuously, walking itself across the granite surface. It was not Terrence this time. It was notifications from news apps, social media alerts, and text messages from numbers I did not recognize. I picked up the phone. A text from my neighbor down the street read simply, "Turn on the news, Bernie. They are talking about you." I walked into the living room and grabbed the remote. I hesitated before pressing the power button. Beatrice looked up at me. Her eyes filled with a fresh wave of fear. "What is it, Bernie?" she asked. "I do not know, B," I said, "but I think Madison just dropped the other shoe." I turned on the television to the local morning news channel. The anchor was speaking with a grave expression. The headline at the bottom of the screen read, "Viral video sparks outrage. Family evicts pregnant daughter-in-law." And there on the screen was Madison. She was not filming from a studio. She was filming from a cell phone camera, likely in her mother's kitchen. She was wearing an oversized gray t-shirt. Her hair was messy and her face was blotchy and red. She looked like a victim. She looked like a girl who had been broken. It was a masterpiece of performance art. I sat down on the edge of the sofa, mesmerized by the lie. "They hate me because I am white." Madison sobbed into the camera, her voice cracking perfectly. "They never accepted me." From the moment Terrence introduced us, his parents looked at me with disgust. They called me names. They called me a colonizer. They said I was polluting their bloodline. Beatrice gasped, clutching her chest. We had never used those words. We had never cared about her race, only her character. Madison wiped her nose with the back of her hand on the screen. "I tried so hard," she continued. "I learned their recipes. I tried to be part of their culture, but last night it went too far. I told them I was pregnant. I showed them the ultrasound of their grandson. And do you know what they did?" She paused for dramatic effect, staring directly into the lens. "They laughed. They laughed at my baby. And then they kicked us out into the rain. They evicted us from our home because Terrence's father owns the building, and he said he would not have a half-breed grandchild living under his roof. We are homeless. I am sleeping on a floor. I am terrified for my baby. Please help us. We just want to survive." The video cut back to the news anchor. That video has been viewed 3 million times in the last 8 hours, the anchor said. The family has set up a GoFundMe page which has already raised $20,000. We reached out to Bernard Freeman for comment but have not received a response. Social justice groups are planning a protest outside the Freeman residence this afternoon. I turned off the television. The room plunged back into silence, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was the silence of a target. Beatrice was shaking violently. Her face was gray. "Why would she say that, Bernie?" she whispered. "Why would she tell the world we are racists? We marched in Selma. We fought for equality. How can she twist it like that? Because she knows it is the one thing that will destroy us." I said, my voice low and grim. "She knows she cannot win on the facts, so she is burning down our reputation. She is weaponizing our history against us." I looked at my phone again. The messages were pouring in now. Strangers found my number. The texts were vile, hateful, people calling me a monster, people telling me to die, people threatening to come to my house and teach me a lesson. I stood up and went to the window. A car drove by slowly. The driver slowed down and pointed at our house. He shouted something I could not hear, but I saw his angry face. "We need to leave B," I said. "We need to go to a hotel. It is not safe here." "I will not run from my own home," Beatrice said, finding a sudden spark of defiance. "I did nothing wrong. I will not let that lying girl chase me out of the house we built." "B, please," I started to say. Crash! The sound was like an explosion. The front window, the big bay window where Beatrice put her Christmas tree every year, shattered inward. Shards of glass flew across the living room carpet like shrapnel. A heavy object thudded onto the floor, rolling to a stop near the coffee table. Beatrice screamed. It was a high, thin sound that cut off abruptly. I dove toward her, shielding her with my body, even though the damage was already done. I looked at the object on the floor. It was a brick wrapped in duct tape. There was a note attached to it with a rubber band. I did not need to read the note to know what it said. I looked at Beatrice. She was not screaming anymore. She was clutching her left arm, her eyes wide and unseeing. Her mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water, but no sound was coming out. "B," I shouted, grabbing her shoulders. "B, look at me. Breathe." She slumped forward, her weight heavy against me. Her skin was cold and clammy. Heart attack. The realization hit me harder than the brick. The stress, the heartbreak, the fear, and now the violence. Her heart, the heart that had loved that boy more than life itself, had finally given out. I scrambled for my phone, my fingers fumbling over the screen. I dialed 911. "My wife is having a heart attack," I yelled into the phone. "I need an ambulance. Now." The next 10 minutes were a blur of terror. I performed CPR, counting the compressions out loud, trying to push life back into her chest. I heard the sirens wailing in the distance, getting closer. I heard the tires screech in the driveway. I saw the paramedics rush in their boots, crunching on the broken glass. They loaded her onto the stretcher. They put an oxygen mask on her face. They hooked her up to monitors that beeped with a frantic, irregular rhythm. "Sir, you cannot ride in the back," the paramedic said, pushing me toward the front seat of the ambulance. As we sped away from the house, I looked back. There were people standing on the sidewalk, a group of teenagers holding signs. They were cheering. They saw the ambulance, and they cheered, thinking that justice had been served to the evil old couple. They did not know they were cheering for the death of a saint. At the hospital, the waiting room was a purgatory of white walls and fluorescent lights. They took Beatrice into surgery. A blockage, they said. Massive coronary event. They were putting in stents, but the damage was severe. Her heart was weak. I sat in a plastic chair, my hands covered in the dust from the brick and the sweat of my fear. I was alone. My son was not there. My son was the reason I was there. I sat there for 2 hours staring at the wall. I thought about the little boy I taught to ride a bike. I thought about the teenager I taught to drive. I thought about the man who stood on my porch and let his wife lie about a baby. And then I thought about the video. I thought about the brick. I thought about Beatrice falling. Something inside me snapped. It was the last tether of fatherhood, the last thread of mercy. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I ignored the hundreds of hate messages. I scrolled to a contact I had saved under the name Fishing Buddy. To the world, Jonathan Sterling was the ruthless senior partner of Sterling & Associates, the most feared litigation firm in the state. To Terrence, he was just old Mr. Sterling, the guy I went fishing with on Sundays, the guy who wore bucket hats and drank cheap beer. Terrence had called him a loser once. He had said I hung out with nobodies. Terrence did not know that Jonathan Sterling charged $1,200 an hour and had never lost a case involving defamation or fraud. I pressed the call button. Jonathan answered on the first ring. "Bernie, I saw the news. I am so sorry. Is Bea okay?" "She is in surgery, John," I said. My voice was dead calm. It sounded like it belonged to someone else. "They threw a brick through my window. She had a heart attack." There was a silence on the line, a dangerous silence. "Tell me what you want to do," Bernie Jonathan said. "I want to burn it down," I said. "I want everything, John. I want to sue them for defamation. I want to sue them for emotional distress. I want to sue for the fraud on the house. I want to sue Madison's parents for the conspiracy. I want to bury them under so much litigation that they will need a breathing tube to see the sun." I paused, taking a breath. "Activate the nuclear option, John." "You mean the full disclosure?" Jonathan asked. "Everything I said. The video from the gate, the audio recordings from the house, the medical records proving she cannot get pregnant, the financial records of her parents, the embezzlement file on Terrence. Release it all." "Bernie, if I do that, there is no coming back," Jonathan warned. "Terrence will go to prison. Madison will be destroyed publicly. This is the end of your family." "My family died when that brick came through the window," I said. "Do it, John. Call the station. Get me on air. I want to look them in the eye when I end them." "Consider it done," Jonathan said. "I will meet you at the hospital in 20 minutes. Bring your suit, Bernie. We have a war to win." I hung up the phone. I looked at the doors to the surgery wing. "Hold on, Bea," I whispered. "Just hold on. I am going to make sure they never hurt you again." Thursday morning arrived with the sterile smell of antiseptic and the hum of hospital machinery. I sat in the waiting room of the cardiac intensive care unit watching the television mounted in the corner. My wife Beatrice was alive, but she was weak. Her heart was beating, but it was a fragile rhythm kept steady by wires and medication. I had not slept. I was wearing the same clothes I had worn the day before, covered in the dust of the brick that had shattered our window. But inside my jacket pocket, I had a fresh handkerchief and a sense of purpose that burned hotter than the sun rising over the city. On the television screen, the local morning talk show was starting. The host, a woman with perfect hair and a sympathetic tilt to her head, introduced her guests, and there they were, Terrence and Madison. They were sitting on a beige sofa holding hands. They looked like the survivors of a natural disaster. Madison was wearing a white dress that was slightly too big for her, making her look small and frail. She had no makeup on. Her eyes were wide and glistening. Terrence was wearing a simple button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up, looking like a man carrying the weight of the world. They were masterful. They were painting a picture of a young couple persecuted by a hateful, prejudiced family. They talked about the eviction in the rain, they talked about being homeless, and then they talked about the baby. "We just want to provide a safe home for our unborn child," Madison whispered to the camera, rubbing her flat stomach. "We are terrified that the stress is going to hurt the pregnancy. We have nothing left. Our bank accounts were frozen by Terrence's father. We are relying on the kindness of strangers." The host nodded, wiping a tear from her eye. "It is truly heartbreaking," she said. "And you have started a GoFundMe campaign, is that correct?" "Yes," Terrence said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are trying to raise $50,000, just enough to get a small apartment and pay for medical expenses for the baby. We just want to start over, away from the toxicity." I looked at the ticker at the bottom of the screen. The campaign had already raised $35,000. People were donating money they could not afford to a man who owned a Rolex and a woman who owned 3 Birkin bags. They were funding a lie. Then the host touched her earpiece. Her expression changed slightly. She looked confused, then intrigued. "We have a development," she said. "We reached out to Bernard Freeman for a comment yesterday. We did not hear back from him directly, but his legal representative has just arrived at the studio and has requested to join the conversation." Terrence frowned. He leaned forward. "My father does not have a legal representative," he said. "He is a retired steelworker. He does not even have a lawyer." The camera panned to the side of the stage. The curtain parted, and Jonathan Sterling walked out. He was not wearing his fishing bucket hat today. He was wearing a charcoal gray 3-piece suit that cost more than Terrence's car. He carried a leather portfolio under one arm. He walked with the confidence of a man who has destroyed corporations and senators for breakfast. He sat down in the empty chair across from Terrence and Madison. Terrence stared at him. He recognized him. "Mr. Sterling?" he asked, bewildered. "The guy from the fishing trip." "Good morning, Terrence," Jonathan said calmly. "Good morning, Madison." "What are you doing here?" Terrence demanded. "This is a private interview. You are my dad's fishing buddy. You are a nobody. I am a senior partner at Sterling and Associates, Jonathan said, his voice projecting clearly to the studio audience and the cameras, and I am here to represent Bernard and Beatrice Freeman. I am also here to present evidence regarding the allegations made on this program and on social media. Madison laughed a nervous, high-pitched sound. Evidence, she scoffed. What evidence? That his parents hate me. That they kicked a pregnant woman out into the rain. Jonathan did not look at her. He looked at the host. May I? He asked, holding up a USB drive. The host nodded, signaling to the production booth. Jonathan plugged the drive into the laptop on the coffee table, which was connected to the massive screen behind them. Exhibit A, Jonathan said. You claim that Mr. and Mrs. Freeman banned themselves from the wedding because they are antisocial and hate your wife. You claim you wanted them there. The screen flickered to life. It was the security footage from the gate of the Grand Estate. It was high definition. It showed my old truck pulling up. It showed the security guard pointing to the sign, and then it zoomed in on the sign itself. The audience gasped. The red letters were unmistakable. Warning. Do not admit these two people. They will ruin the luxury aesthetic. Terrence went pale. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. That is a forgery, he finally stammered. That is photoshopped. We have the affidavit from the security company, Jonathan said smoothly. And the invoice you paid for the printing of the sign. He clicked a button. Exhibit B. Jonathan continued. You claim that Bernard Freeman is a cruel man who cut you off without reason. You claim he hates his grandchild. The audio file began to play. It was the recording from my kitchen. Terrence's voice filled the studio loud and clear. If that money is not in my account in the next 5 minutes, you will never see this child. You will never hold it. You will never know its name. You will die without ever meeting your grandchild. The studio audience went silent. The sympathy in the room evaporated instantly. The host looked horrified. She pulled back from Terrence as if he were contagious. That was blackmail, Jonathan stated. You attempted to extort $50,000 from your father by using an unborn child as a hostage. Madison grabbed Terrence's arm. Her eyes were darting around the room looking for an exit. Stop this, she shrieked. This is illegal. You cannot play private conversations. We are leaving. Sit down, Madison, Jonathan said. His voice was not loud, but it had the weight of a gavel. Because we are not done. We have one final piece of evidence. He clicked the button again. Exhibit C, Jonathan said. The medical records. A document appeared on the screen. It was a surgical report from a private clinic in Miami dated 2 years ago. You have raised $35,000 from the public based on the claim that you are pregnant and homeless, Jonathan said. You have stated repeatedly on this show and in your video that Bernard Freeman evicted a pregnant woman. He pointed to the screen. This is a medical record for a laparoscopic bilateral tubal ligation performed on Madison Courtney. For the lay people in the audience, that means her tubes were tied. It is a permanent sterilization procedure. The silence in the studio was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens after a bomb goes off before the screaming starts. Terrence turned his head slowly to look at his wife. His face was a mask of confusion and dawning horror. What is that? He whispered. Madison was shaking her head, her face draining of all color. That is fake, she whispered. That is a lie. It is certified, Jonathan said. We also have the billing record paid for by your father's credit card. Terrence stood up. He looked at the screen. He looked at the date. 2 years ago, he said, his voice rising. We have been trying for a baby for a year. You told me we were trying. You told me you were taking vitamins. You showed me the test. I bought the test online, Madison blurted out, and then she slammed her hand over her mouth, realizing what she had just admitted. The audience erupted. People stood up shouting, liar, fraud, thief. Terrence stared at her. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had destroyed his relationship with his parents. He had humiliated them. He had lost his inheritance. He had become a pariah. And he had done it all for a woman who had been lying to him about the one thing he wanted most. There was no baby. There was no dynasty. There was just a lie built on top of a lie. You lied to me, Terrence screamed. You let me blackmail my father with a baby that does not exist. Madison looked at the cameras. She looked at the hostile audience. She looked at Jonathan Sterling, who was watching her with cold detachment. She had no moves left. She had no cards to play. She did the only thing a coward does when cornered. Her eyes rolled back in her head. Her knees buckled. She collapsed onto the floor in a heap of white fabric. It was a fake feint. I knew it. Jonathan knew it. Even the host knew it. But the cameras kept rolling. "Cut the feed," the host yelled, but it was too late. It was live. Millions of people had just watched the dismantling of the Courtney Freeman fraud. Jonathan stood up and straightened his jacket. He looked directly into the camera. To anyone who donated to the GoFundMe, he said, calm and authoritative, "We have already contacted the platform. The funds have been frozen and will be refunded. This fraud is over." He turned and walked off the set, leaving Terrence standing over his fake, unconscious wife amidst the ruins of his life. I sat in the hospital waiting room and let out a breath I had been holding for days. I felt a hand on my shoulder. A nurse was standing there. "Mr. Freeman," she said, "your wife is awake. She is asking for you." I stood up. My joints popped. I felt 10 years older, but 10 pounds lighter. I walked toward the ICU doors. I did not look back at the television. I did not need to see the aftermath. I knew what was coming. The lawsuits, the divorce, the criminal charges. My son was alone now, truly alone. He had wanted to be independent. He had wanted to be separate from me. He got his wish. The fallout from the television broadcast was swift and absolute, like a building collapsing under a controlled demolition. Within 3 hours of the credits rolling, Terrence received an email from his marketing firm. They did not even dignify him with a phone call. The subject line simply read, "Termination of contract effective immediately." They cited a violation of the company code of conduct and the reputational damage caused by his public fraud. He was toxic. No one wanted a liar and a blackmailer handling their brand. Madison did not wait for the eviction notice from the sublet she had scrambled into. She packed her bags the moment the cameras cut. She fled back to her parents' house in Connecticut, blaming Terrence for the humiliation, blaming him for the fake pregnancy scandal, blaming him for the lack of money. She left a note on the counter that said she was filing for an annulment based on fraud. The rats were not just leaving the ship, they were eating each other on the way out. Terrence was alone. For the first time in his life, he had no safety net. No mother to cook him dinner, no father to wire him cash, no wife to validate his ego, no job to fuel his arrogance. He sat in his rental car parked outside a liquor store drinking cheap vodka from the bottle. The burning liquid did not numb the pain, it fueled the rage. He stewed in a toxic broth of self-pity and entitlement. He did not see his actions as the cause of his ruin. He saw me. He saw the father who had dared to say no. He saw the man who had hidden millions while he struggled to keep up appearances. He started the car. His vision was blurred, his coordination shot, but his anger gave him a terrifying focus. He drove through the suburbs, swerving across the center line, running red lights, guided by a singular destructive impulse. He was coming to the source of his misery. He was coming to make me pay for his sins. It was 2 in the morning when I heard the screech of tires on the asphalt outside. I was awake, sitting in the dark upstairs bedroom, listening to the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor I had bought for Beatrice since she came home from the hospital. She was sleeping, sedated and peaceful, unaware that the storm had returned. I walked to the window and looked down. Terrence's car was parked haphazardly on the lawn, tearing up the grass Beatrice had planted last spring. The engine was still running, the headlights cutting through the darkness like spotlights on a crime scene. Terrence stumbled out of the driver's side. He almost fell, catching himself on the doorframe. In his hand, he held a metal baseball bat. It was the same bat I had bought him for Little League when he was 10 years old. He had kept it in his trunk all these years, not for sports, but for protection, he said. Now he was using it as a weapon against his own history. He walked toward my truck, the old 1998 Ford F-150, the truck he hated, the truck he called an eyesore, the truck that had carried the steel and the tools that built his life. He swung the bat. The sound of metal hitting metal rang out through the quiet neighborhood like a church bell from hell. He hit the front fender, putting a deep dent in the steel. He swung again, smashing the headlight. The glass shattered, tinkling onto the driveway. I watched from above, feeling a strange detachment. I was not angry. I was not scared. I was witnessing a tantrum of biblical proportions. "You did this," Terrence screamed, his voice raw and slurred. "You did this to me." He swung at the windshield. The safety glass spiderwebbed under the impact, turning opaque white. "You have millions," he yelled, striking the hood again and again. "You have millions of dollars, and you let me live like a peasant. You let me struggle. You let me humiliate myself. It is your fault." He was crying now, great heaving sobs that shook his body, but he did not stop swinging. He moved around the truck, smashing the side mirrors, denting the doors, breaking the taillights. He was trying to kill the truck because he could not kill me. He was trying to destroy the symbol of the work he despised because he realized too late that the work was worth more than he was. "You selfish old man," he screamed, looking up at the house. "You hid it. You hid it all. You let them laugh at me. You let me lose everything. I hate you. I hate your money. I hate this house." He hit the truck one last time with all his strength. The bat bounced off the heavy steel bumper and the vibration jarred his hands. He dropped the bat. He fell to his knees in the driveway, surrounded by broken glass and his own broken life. He put his head in his hands and howled. It was a sound of pure agony. The agony of a man who knows he is wrong but cannot admit it, so he blames the only person who ever loved him. I turned away from the window. I did not go down there. I did not go out to comfort him. I did not go out to take the bat away or to tell him to stop. That was what the old Bernard would have done. The old Bernard would have tried to fix it. The new Bernard walked over to the nightstand and picked up the phone. I dialed 911. "Emergency services," the operator answered. "I would like to report a crime in progress." I said, my voice steady. "There is a man in my driveway destroying my vehicle. He is intoxicated. He is armed with a baseball bat, and he is screaming threats." "Do you know the man, sir?" the operator asked. I hesitated for a fraction of a second. I looked at the family photo on the dresser taken when Terrence was graduating high school. He looked so hopeful then, so innocent. "Yes," I said. "I know him. But he is a stranger to me now. Please send officers immediately. My wife is recovering from a heart attack and I fear for her safety." I stayed on the line until I saw the blue and red lights flashing against the bedroom walls. I watched as 2 patrol cars pulled up blocking the driveway. 4 officers stepped out, hands on their holsters. Terrence was still on his knees, muttering to himself. He did not even hear them approach until they shouted at him, "Drop the weapon! Put your hands on your head!" Terrence looked up, blinking in the glare of the police lights. He looked confused, as if waking up from a dream. He tried to stand up, but his legs were unsteady from the alcohol. He stumbled toward the officers. "That is my dad's truck," he slurred, pointing at the wreckage. He owes me everything." "Sir, get on the ground," one officer commanded. Terrence lunged forward, perhaps to explain, perhaps to fight. It did not matter. The officers did not take chances with drunk men holding baseball bats nearby. They took him down hard. His face hit the gravel. I saw him wince. I saw them pull his arms behind his back. I heard the click of the handcuffs. They dragged him to his feet. He was limp, dead weight. He looked up at the window. He saw me standing there watching him. "Dad," he screamed. "Dad, help me. Tell them it is okay." I did not move. I did not wave. I just watched. The officers put him in the back of the patrol car. He kicked the window from the inside, screaming my name, screaming that he was sorry, screaming that he hated me, screaming for his mother. One of the officers walked up to the front door and knocked. I went downstairs and opened it. The cool night air smelled of gasoline and crushed glass. "Mr. Freeman," the officer asked. "Yes." "We have the suspect in custody. He is intoxicated. We are charging him with driving under the influence, trespassing, vandalism, and disorderly conduct. Given the value of the damage to the vehicle, this is a felony vandalism charge." I nodded. "I understand." "He claims he is your son," the officer said, looking at me closely. "He is asking if you want to post bail or if you want to drop the charges. He says it is a family dispute." I looked past the officer at the patrol car. I could see Terrence's silhouette in the back seat thrashing against the restraints. "He broke my window 2 days ago," I said. "He caused my wife to have a heart attack. Tonight he came back with a weapon. This is not a family dispute, officer. This is a home invasion. So you are pressing charges." "To the fullest extent of the law," I said. "And bail?" the officer asked. "The magistrate will set it in the morning. He will probably call you." "Tell him not to bother," I said. The officer looked surprised. "Sir, he is going to the county lockup. It is not a nice place." "I know," I said. "I know exactly what kind of place it is." I looked the officer in the eye. "He needs a quiet place to think, officer. He needs a place where no one pays his bills, where no one cleans up his mess, and where he has to face the man in the mirror. Do not let him out. Let him sit there. Let him sober up. Let him realize that actions have consequences." The officer nodded slowly, tipping his cap. "Understood, Mr. Freeman. We will take him in." I watched them drive away. The lights faded into the distance, leaving the street dark and quiet again. I looked at my truck. It was destroyed. The hood was caved in. The glass was shattered. The metal was twisted. It was a total loss. I walked over to it and ran my hand along the dented fender. It was just a truck. It was metal and rubber. It could be replaced. But the boy who used to sit in the passenger seat asking me to drive faster, the boy who used to sleep in the back on camping trips, that boy was gone. He had been gone for a long time. Tonight, I just finally stopped looking for him. I went back inside and locked the door. I checked on Beatrice. She was still sleeping, the rhythm of her heart monitor steady and strong. I sat in the chair beside her bed and closed my eyes. The house was safe. The threat was gone. My son was in a cage. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could finally rest. The war was over. The rebuilding could begin. The visiting room at the county jail smelled of bleach and unwashed bodies, a scent that stuck to the back of your throat long after you left. I sat on a metal stool bolted to the floor, staring through a thick sheet of scratched plexiglass. It had been 7 days since the police took my son away. 7 days since he destroyed my truck and the last remnants of my patience. When the guard finally brought him in, I barely recognized the man shuffling toward the booth. Terrence was wearing an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. He had lost 10 pounds in a week. His skin was sallow, his eyes were sunken and bloodshot, and his hands shook as he reached for the phone on the wall. He looked like a ghost of the arrogant executive who had stood on my porch demanding entrance. The bravado was gone, replaced by a raw, terrified desperation. He picked up the receiver and pressed it against his ear. I did the same. "Dad," he choked out, his voice cracking. "Oh God, Dad, you came. You have to get me out of here, please. It is a nightmare in here. The other inmates, they know who I am. They saw the news. I cannot survive in here." I watched him cry. I watched the tears track through the stubble on his cheeks. I felt a pang of pity, but it was distant, like watching a stranger suffer in a movie. "I am sorry, Dad." He wept, leaning his forehead against the glass. "I was wrong. I was so wrong. It was Madison. She twisted my head. She made me think we were better than everyone. She made me do it. But I am your son. I am your flesh and blood. You have the money. I know you do. Just post bail. Get me a lawyer. We can fix this. I will pay you back every cent, I swear. I will work in the warehouse. I will do anything. Just do not leave me here." He was still doing it. Even in a cage, he was bargaining. He was blaming the woman he chose. He was promising things he could not deliver. He still thought this was a transaction. He thought that if he said the right words, the magic wallet would open and the consequences would disappear. I reached into the canvas bag I had brought with me. I did not pull out a checkbook. I did not pull out bail papers. I pulled out a thick manila envelope sealed with red tape. I held it up to the glass so he could see it. "I am not here to bail you out, Terrence," I said, my voice flat and tinny through the phone receiver. "I am here to tell you why you are never getting out." Terrence frowned, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "What is that? Is that the deed to the house? Are you selling it to help me?" "No, son," I said. "This is your personnel file from 3 years ago, from your time at Delta Logistics, before you got your fancy marketing job." Terrence froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like wet ash. He knew what was in that file. He had spent 3 years thinking that secret was buried deep in the corporate archives. "You always told everyone you were a genius at that job." I continued, opening the envelope and pressing the first document against the glass. "You told Madison you left because you were headhunted. You told your mother you outgrew the position. You walked around like you were the smartest man in the room." I flipped the page. "But the truth is, you were fired, Terrence. You were fired for embezzlement, $200,000. You diverted funds from the vendor accounts into a shell company you set up. You thought you were clever. You thought they would not notice the rounding errors, but they did." Terrence started shaking his head. No, Dad, do not. "They were going to press charges," I said, ignoring him. "They were going to send you to federal prison for 10 years. They had the FBI ready to pick you up." I leaned closer to the glass. "Who do you think stopped them?" Terrence stared at me, his eyes wide with horror. "It was not your charm, Terrence. It was me. The CEO of Delta Logistics is an old friend from the steel mill days. He called me before he called the police. He told me my son was a thief. He asked me what I wanted to do." I paused, letting the memory wash over me. The shame I had felt that day was worse than any pain I had ever known. "I wired them $200,000 the next morning," I said. I liquidated my retirement portfolio. I sold a piece of land I was saving for your inheritance. I paid back every single dime you stole, plus interest, plus a donation to their charity fund to buy their silence. I signed a non-disclosure agreement. I made sure your record was scrubbed clean so you could get another job, so you could have a fresh start. I watched the realization hit him. He had walked through life thinking he was invincible, thinking his talent protected him. He had looked down on me thinking I was a simple laborer, while I was secretly buying his freedom with the fortune he despised. I never told you, I said, my voice hardening, because I wanted you to learn. I thought if you got a second chance, you would do better. I thought if I saved you quietly, you would grow up. But you did not grow up. You just got better at hiding your rot. You took that second chance, and you used it to spit in my face. You used the freedom I bought you to mock my existence. You knew, Terrence whispered. You knew the whole time. I knew everything I said. I knew when you bought the Rolex. I knew when you lied about your salary. I knew when you met Madison and started pretending you were old money. I watched you build a castle on a foundation of lies that I paid for. And I waited. I waited for you to become a man. But you never did. You just became a more expensive child. I closed the file. That $200,000 was your inheritance, Terrence. That was your safety net. That was the money that was supposed to buy you a house or start a business. You spent it 3 years ago to stay out of jail. You spent it on your freedom, and now that account is empty. Terrence slumped against the wall of the booth, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor. He looked small. He looked broken. But this time, I did not feel the urge to fix him. The part of me that was a father had died the night he threatened to keep my grandchild from me. The man sitting across from me was just a criminal I used to know. I stood up. My knees popped. I felt light. The secret I had carried for 3 years was finally out in the open. The burden was no longer mine. Dad, please. Terrence moaned from the floor, still holding the receiver. I am sorry. I did not know. You have millions. You can still help me. Just one more time. I looked down at him. Even now, after everything, he was counting my money. He did not see the sacrifice. He only saw the balance sheet. I do not have millions for you, Terrence, I said. You said I hid my money from you. You said I was selfish. But I did not hide it. I used it. I used it to pay your rent. I used it to pay your credit cards. I used it to keep you out of prison. I used it to clean up the mess you made of your life for 32 years. I hung the receiver back on the hook. It clicked into place with a sound of finality. I leaned down to speak through the small metal grate in the glass. But I am retired now, son. The janitor service is closed. The bank is closed. The daddy service is closed. You made this mess. You sit in it. You clean it up. I turned around and walked toward the heavy steel door. Dad, Terrence screamed, his voice muffled by the glass. Dad, do not walk away. Come back. Dad. I did not look back. I pushed the door open and stepped out into the hallway. The air was still stale, but to me it smelled like freedom. I walked past the guard station, past the other visitors, past the weeping mothers and the angry wives. I walked out into the bright sunshine of the parking lot. I got into my rental car. I checked my phone. There was a text from Jonathan. The civil lawsuits against Madison's parents were ready to be filed. The foreclosure proceedings on their home had begun. I started the engine. I had one more stop to make, one more loose end to tie up. But as for Terrence, his story with me was over. He was exactly where he belonged. And for the first time in a long time, so was I. 2 weeks after I left my son in a jail cell, the ripples of his destruction finally reached the shore of the Courtney estate in Connecticut. Richard and Sylvia Courtney, the people who had demanded a black tie dress code while living on a line of credit, were finally out of options. They had pinned all their hopes on Terrence. They believed his lies because they needed his imaginary oil money to bail out their failing hospitality group. When the truth came out on national television that Terrence was a fraud and that I was the one holding the purse strings, their house of cards collapsed instantly. The banks moved in like sharks, sensing blood in the water. Foreclosure notices were plastered on the gates of their ancestral home. Their cars were repossessed in the middle of the night. Madison had fled to Europe with a wealthy friend, leaving her parents to face the music alone. But desperation makes people resourceful. Richard Courtney started digging. He hired a forensic accountant with the last of his pawned watch money to find out exactly how much I was worth. He found the shell companies. He found BF Holdings. He He found the property deeds. He realized that the black steelworker he had banned from his daughter's wedding was actually a real estate tycoon with enough liquid capital to buy his entire neighborhood. The realization must have tasted like ash in his mouth. But pride is the first thing to go when you are about to be homeless. They called my lawyer, Jonathan Sterling, every day for a week. They sent emails apologizing for the misunderstanding at the wedding. They claimed they were victims of Terrence's lies, too. They claimed we were all family united by the tragedy. They begged for a meeting. I let them sweat for 10 days. I let them watch the moving trucks park down the street. I waited until the sheriff was scheduled to execute the eviction order. Then I told Jonathan to grant them an audience. I wanted to see them beg. I wanted to see the people who thought they were better than me ask for a crumb from my table. The meeting took place in the main conference room of Sterling and Associates. It was a room designed to intimidate, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline and a mahogany table that was longer than a bowling alley. I sat at the head of the table wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than Richard's car. Jonathan sat to my right, silent and imposing. When the Courtneys walked in, they looked like ghosts. Richard had aged 10 years in 2 weeks. His suit was wrinkled and his hands shook. Sylvia looked frail, her haughty demeanor replaced by a nervous twitch in her left eye. They stopped at the door, waiting for permission to enter. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that the air in the room felt heavy. "Mr. Freeman." "Richard," said his voice cracking. "Thank you for seeing us. We are so incredibly sorry for everything." "Please sit," I said, gesturing to the chairs at the far end of the table. They sat down, clutching each other's hands. They launched into a rehearsed speech about how Terrence had manipulated them, how they were good people who had just made a mistake in judgment. They talked about heritage and legacy. They talked about how their home had been in the Courtney family for 4 generations. "We are in a temporary cash flow bind," Sylvia said, her voice trembling. "The banks are being unreasonable. They are threatening to take the house over a bridge loan. We just need a little time to restructure." "How much do you need, Richard?" I asked, cutting through the noise. Richard swallowed hard. He looked at the table, then at me. $2.5 million, he whispered. "Just to clear the immediate liens and stop the auction. We can pay you back with interest once the market turns. We just need a bridge loan. We are asking you as family." I leaned back in my leather chair. Family. They had called me a dirty laborer. They had put my face on a poster to keep me out. Now I was family because I had a checkbook. "I am not going to give you a loan, Richard," I said calmly. Sylvia let out a sob. Richard's face fell into his hands. But I continued, "I am willing to help you with the bank." They looked up, hope flaring in their eyes like a match in the dark. "Really?" Richard asked. "Yes," I said. "I know the vice president of the bank holding your mortgage. We have done business before. I can step in. I can make sure the foreclosure stops today." "Oh, thank you," Sylvia cried. "Thank you, Bernard. We knew you were a good man. We knew you would understand the value of legacy." Jonathan slid a document across the long table. It was a single page, thick and heavy. "Sign this authorization," I said. "It gives my company, BF Holdings, the right to negotiate directly with the bank on your behalf regarding the deed to your property. Once you sign this, I will wire the funds to the bank immediately. The sheriff will be called off. You will not be evicted today." They did not even read it. They were so desperate, so relieved, that they grabbed the pen and signed their names with shaking hands. They thought they had won. They thought they had manipulated the simple old man into saving their skins. They thought they were safe. I watched them sign. I watched them smile at each other. They had no idea that they had just signed their own execution order. Richard handed the paper back to Jonathan. He stood up, reaching out his hand to shake mine. "You have saved us, Bernard," he said, tears in his eyes. "You are a true gentleman. We will never forget this." I did not stand up. I did not shake his hand. "Sit down, Richard," I said. "We are not done." Richard froze. He slowly lowered himself back into the chair. Jonathan picked up his phone and made a call. He spoke 2 words. "Execute it." I looked at the Courtneys. "I told you I would stop the foreclosure," I said. And I did. "I just wired $2.5 million to your bank. I bought the note." Sylvia smiled uncertainly. "That is wonderful. So we pay you back now instead of the bank. What are the terms?" "There are no terms, Sylvia," I said. "I did not loan you the money. I bought the debt. That means I am the bank now. I own the mortgage. And since you are currently 12 months behind on payments and in default of the original contract, I am exercising my right as the lien holder." I signaled to Jonathan. He pulled out a second document. This one was red. "This is a notice of acceleration and immediate repossession," Jonathan said, sliding it across the table. "Since the previous owner failed to cure the default, the new note holder, BF Holdings, is taking title to the property effective immediately." Richard's face went white. He stood up, knocking his chair over. "You cannot do that," he screamed. "You said you would help us." "I did help you," I said. "I saved you from the embarrassment of a public auction. Now it is a private transfer." "You tricked us," Sylvia shrieked. "You stole our house." "I bought your house," I corrected. "I paid fair market value for a distressed asset. It is business, Richard. Just like the business you tried to do with my son." "But where will we go?" Richard stammered. "That is our home." "You have 1 week," I said. 1 week to remove your personal effects. Anything left after 7 days becomes the property of BF Holdings." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. "And Richard," I said without turning around, "do not worry about the legacy of the house. I have big plans for it." "What plans?" he whispered. "I am donating the property," I said, turning to face them. "I have already filed the paperwork with the city. The Courtney estate will be renovated and reopened next month. It will be the new Bernard Freeman Center for Underprivileged Minority Youth." The silence in the room was absolute. I saw the realization hit them. Their ancestral home, the symbol of their white upper-class exclusion, was going to become a shelter for the very children they looked down upon. It would bear the name of the black man they tried to ban. "No," Sylvia whispered, sliding to the floor. "You cannot." "It is done," I said. "The sign goes up on Monday. I made sure to order a big one. Red letters. Just like the one you made for me. Get out of my office." They left in silence, broken and defeated. They had lost everything. Their money, their home, their legacy. And they had lost it to the man they thought was not good enough to walk through their front door. I watched them leave the building from my window. They looked small from up here. I picked up my phone and called Beatrice. "It is finished, Bea," I said. "The house is ours." I heard her breathe a sigh of relief on the other end. "Come home, Bernie," she said. "Dinner is ready." "I am coming home," I said. I packed up my briefcase. I walked out of the office, leaving the lights off. The war was over. The enemy was vanquished. And I had a legacy to build. One that was based on truth, not lies. One that would last. The sun over the Mediterranean does not burn like the sun over the steel mill used to. It warms you, it settles into your bones, and tells you that you have survived the winter. I sat on the aft deck of the Lady Beatrice, a 60-foot yacht that I bought with cash 3 months ago. The water around us was a deep, impossible blue stretching out to meet the sky in a seamless horizon. For 40 years, I hid my wealth like a shameful secret buried under flannel shirts and an old Ford truck. I thought I was protecting my family from the corruption of money. I thought I was teaching humility. But I learned the hard way that hiding your light does not help the blind see. It just makes you stumble in the dark. So we stopped hiding. I looked across the deck at Beatrice. She was standing at the railing, looking out at the coastline of Italy. She was wearing a white linen dress and a wide-brimmed hat, and she looked like a queen. The doctors said her heart would always be fragile. But looking at her now, you would never know she had nearly died on our living room floor. The fear was gone from her eyes. The hunch in her shoulders from years of carrying invisible burdens had vanished. She was radiant. She was the woman I fell in love with 50 years ago, but stronger. She had walked through the fire with me, and she had come out forged in steel. We had sold the house in the suburbs. We sold the memories of the brick through the window and the nights of crying. We kept the Freeman Center running, of course. I hired a full staff to manage the youth programs at the old Courtney estate. Every month I get reports about kids getting scholarships, kids getting off the streets, kids finding hope in the house that was built on exclusion. It is the best investment I ever made. But we do not live there. We live here, in the wind, in the sun, in the peace we earned. I took a sip of my wine. It was a vintage red costing more per bottle than my weekly wage at the mill used to be. It tasted like victory. I watched Beatrice turn and smile at me. She walked over and sat in the chair opposite mine. She reached out and took my hand. Her skin was warm. "You are quiet today, Bernie," she said. "I am just thinking, Bea," I said, "about how far we came." She nodded, looking down at our joined hands. The silence between us was comfortable now. It was no longer filled with the static of unsaid things or the tension of waiting for the next crisis. But there was still one ghost that walked the deck with us, one shadow that the Mediterranean sun could not quite banish. "Do you miss him?" she asked softly. She did not say his name. She did not have to. I looked out at the water. I watched a seagull dive and surface with a fish. The cycle of life. The predator and the prey. I miss the boy, I said, my voice steady. I miss the 5-year-old who used to run to the door when I came home from shift covered in soot. I miss the 10-year-old who wanted me to teach him how to throw a curveball. I miss the idea of him be. I miss the future I thought we were building. I squeezed her hand. But I do not miss the man he became, I said. I do not miss the liar. I do not miss the thief. I do not miss the person who looked at you and saw a bank account instead of a mother. Beatrice sighed a sound that was half sadness and half acceptance. I worry about him sometimes, she admitted. In that place. He is where he chose to be, I said. We did not put him there, B. His greed put him there. His arrogance put him there. If we had bailed him out again, if we had let him get away with it, he would have destroyed us. He would have drained us dry and stepped over our bodies to get to the next mark. I looked her in the eye. It was a tumor, B. It was a malignancy attached to our family. You do not keep a tumor because it is part of you. You cut it out so the rest of the body can live. We cut it out. And now we are alive. She nodded slowly, a single tear tracking down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly. You are right, she said. We are alive, and we are together. Just then a buzzing sound broke the peace. It was a harsh mechanical vibration rattling against the teak wood of the table. I looked down. It was my phone. It sat there vibrating insistently, demanding attention in paradise. I picked it up. The screen was bright in the sunlight. The caller ID did not show a name. It showed a location. State Correctional Facility, collect call. It was Tuesday. Visiting day, or calling day. I stared at the screen. I could imagine him on the other end, standing in the line of inmates holding the plastic receiver, waiting for the tone. He would be thinner now, maybe harder, or maybe just more desperate. He would want to say he was sorry. He would want to ask for commissary money. He would want to ask if we were coming to visit. He would want to drag us back into the mud. He wanted a connection. He wanted the lifeline back. I looked at Beatrice. She saw the screen too. She knew who it was. Her breath hitched for a second. The mother in her wanted to answer. The mother in her wanted to hear his voice. But then she looked at me. She looked at the peace we had built. She looked at the scars on her own heart. She reached out and covered my hand with hers. She shook her head. No more, Bernie, she whispered. No more. I nodded. I did not decline the call. I did not silence it. I stood up. I walked to the railing of the yacht. The wind whipped at my shirt. The ocean churned below a deep, endless blue that swallowed everything it touched. The phone was still vibrating in my hand. A heartbeat of a dead life. I looked at the screen one last time. Goodbye, son, I thought. I opened my hand. The phone tumbled through the air. It sparkled for a second in the sunlight, a piece of metal and glass and memories. Then it hit the water with a small, insignificant splash. It disappeared instantly, consumed by the wake of the boat. I watched the spot where it went down until we had left it far behind, until there was nothing but blue water and white foam. I turned back to my wife. I walked over to the table and picked up my wine glass. I picked up hers and handed it to her. She took it, her hand steady. To us, I said, to the life we built, and to the peace we earned. Beatrice smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. To us, she said. We clinked the glasses. The sound rang out clear and pure over the water. We drank. The wine was sweet. The sun was warm. And for the first time in a long time, the silence was truly empty. There were no more ghosts. There were no more debts. There was just the horizon and the two of us sailing toward it. The past was at the bottom of the ocean. The future was right here on the deck. I am Bernard Freeman. I was a steelworker. I was a father. Now I am just a man who learned that the only way to win the game is to stop playing by the rules of those who want to use you. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments if you would have dropped the phone. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and remember, respect is not given, it is earned. I learned that a legacy is not built on the zeros in your bank account, but on the boundaries you set while you are still breathing. For decades, I confused enabling with loving, thinking that shielding my son from the struggle would make him strong, but it only made him weak. True family is not defined by DNA, it is defined by mutual respect and loyalty. If you have to buy your seat at the table, you are eating with the wrong people. Walking away was the hardest thing I ever did, but it was the only way to save myself. If you would have dropped that phone into the ocean, just like I did, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about reclaiming your dignity.